There are about 12,000 years worth of human history that we know very little about. If you take all the recorded history of humanity from the beginning to the present day and lay it out in front of you like a loaf of bread, the slice of that loaf that is actually recorded is so thin it's almost invisible. All the archaeological evidence we have for most of the time we've been on this planet consists of a few scraps of pottery or maybe a single stone tool. We don't even know how many millions of people lived during most of the time humans have existed. But every once in a while, something comes along to remind us that there was more to life back then than we had previously thought. Discoveries that could change the way we think about humanity's past. In 1974, a team of archaeologists led by Richard Nixon found something unusual in the Nahum Petitul site in Israel. They discovered the skeletons of two men who had died in battle around 3600 BC, roughly 5,600 years ago. One of these men had died with a spear sticking out of his chest, and the other with an arrow through his knee. However, what made this discovery interesting is that next to them, they found a bull skull. The two men seemed to have died trying to protect the head of the bull. In fact, the closer they examined the remains, the more it seemed as though the two men had been part of a much larger group, all of whom had been killed defending the sacred animal. Along with the bodies, they found a small settlement, broken pottery, and the remnants of what may have been a religious ritual. To top it off, radiocarbon dating suggests that these men were killed anywhere between 4500 and 3800 BC. So it turns out the site they found was not only at least 1,000 years older than anything else they'd ever discovered in the region, but it was also the oldest known massacre in the Levant region of the Middle East. It was quite possibly one of the first instances of extreme violence in human history. However, like so many discoveries before it, it was quickly forgotten. And the truth is that this is much more common than you might expect. While the story of civilization seems to be a continuous narrative when you study it, that's just a story that's been put together by those who survived and left records of their existence. For every great city whose origins can be traced back to its mythical founder, there were 100 others whose people never wrote down their own story and were eventually absorbed into larger civilizations. As much of human history as we can account for happened in civilizations that developed along rivers. These early societies sprung up near fertile areas like the Nile, Tigris, Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow River, where agriculture was possible on a large scale and communities could develop into cities. But these weren't the only places people settled. There were also mountain people, forest people, desert people, and people who lived on coasts, lakes, and islands. And each of these ways of life developed into its own culture. Unfortunately, almost none of these cultures left behind any kind of record of their existence, and so their entire histories have been lost. We have found traces of some of these lost civilizations, and we keep learning more about them. Every year, archaeologists find new settlements, burial grounds, and artifacts from people who lived far from the centers of civilization. Most of these people were farmers and artisans who lived largely independent of the great kingdoms that dominated the plains. Their history is being uncovered gradually, but it will likely be a very long time before we learn much about them at all. That said, the stories of some lost civilizations are coming back to light thanks to new technology and innovative techniques. One of the largest lost civilizations belongs to the Indus Valley. This civilization emerged around 2800 BC and lasted until around 1800 BC, existing for around 1,000 years. At its peak, it covered parts of modern Pakistan and northwest India. We know relatively little about the Indus people because they left no written records and almost nothing made of metal, which is the only material that lasts for thousands of years. Instead, most of what we know about them comes from their carefully planned cities and the few pieces of pottery that have disintegrated. However, since these cities were mostly made of wood and unbaked brick, they didn't last any longer than the civilizations that built them. We do know that they kept domesticated animals, grew food, mined metals, and traded with other civilizations. But we don't know what language they spoke, if they had a religion, or what ultimately caused the sudden collapse of their society. A recent development in archaeology has helped shed some light on the Indus people. Until recently, scientists had no idea that there was any connection between the Indus people and those who lived in the Iranian plateau to the west. However, using new scanning technologies, researchers were able to look inside ancient tombs without even opening them up. By scanning one tomb in particular, they were able to identify the skeleton of a man, woman, and child who were buried together. Then, by examining other tombs in the area, they realized that the same thing had happened elsewhere. Archaeologists were able to tell that the man, woman, and child were related by looking at the DNA preserved in their teeth and comparing it. The results showed that the man and woman were siblings and the child was theirs. Researchers then looked back at ancient texts written in Persia and realized that many of the place names mentioned could be found in the Indus Valley. Put together, it is clear that the two regions were connected by trade routes and that people moved freely between them. Even more shocking, researchers realized that both regions seem to have collapsed around the same time due to climate change. After 1800 BC, the amount of rainfall in the region dropped dramatically, causing ecological devastation. This would have led to crop failures, starvation, and conflict, all of which contributed to the end of the civilization. While there are many similarities between the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization and that of many other ancient cultures, sometimes the transition from obscurity to prominence is much less clear-cut. The Kingdom of Kush is one such example. Little is known about the beginnings of the Kushite civilization, but it's believed to have originated around 2000 BC in what is today northern Sudan. The Kushites were neighbors of the Egyptians and shared many cultural similarities with them. But unlike the Egyptians, not much is known about their history. During their peak around 1000 BC, the Kingdom of Kush stretched from the Egyptian border in the north to the Central African rainforest in the south. Despite their vast size, almost nothing was known about the Kingdom of Kush until 1820 when a Scottish explorer named John Bell discovered a series of pyramids near the town of Meroe. Since then, hundreds of these pyramids have been discovered, and it has become clear that the Kingdom of Kush was home to a large number of pharaohs. Although the Kushite pyramids aren't nearly as large as those in Egypt, they are much more numerous. Over 200 of these pyramids have been found, and many more are expected to turn up in the future. For a long time, it was thought that the Kingdom of Kush was little more than a smaller version of Egypt, and that its kings were simply tributaries of the Egyptian rulers. However, recent evidence suggests that things may not have been so simple. When archaeologists explored one of the royal tombs, they discovered that it contained a coffin made of gold leaf and inlaid with precious stones. Inside the coffin was a chariot, furniture, and enough riches to suggest that the occupant was a tremendously wealthy individual. They also found a collection of Kushite seals that seemed to show a pharaoh wearing traditional Egyptian clothing and jewelry. These findings, along with others, have forced historians to reconsider what exactly the relationship was between Kush and Egypt. It's clear that Kush had many similarities with Egypt, but it seems as though the two regions also competed for power and influence. Only further excavations will reveal the full extent of the Kingdom of Kush and its role in the ancient world. Sometimes it's hard to believe that some civilizations were ever real, even though evidence of their existence is right in front of us. Take the mysterious Dogon people of Mali, for example. These people live high up in the cliffs of the Bandiagara escarpment, hidden away from the outside world. For hundreds of years, they've carved a living out of the land and formed one of the most unique cultures on Earth. It is easy to imagine them as an isolated tribe of people who've been untouched by modern society. But what's surprising is that the Dogon have a rich history that dates back thousands of years. According to oral tradition, the Dogon have lived in Mali for as long as 50,000 years. If this is true, they were likely among the first people to settle in the region. Unfortunately, because they have no written records, it's impossible to know for sure how long they've been there. What makes the Dogon truly remarkable is that they appear to have come out of nowhere. In the 19th century, French explorers began venturing into the area, but they found no trace of the Dogon people. Yet when they returned 20 years later, the Dogon were flourishing and had already developed a complex society with its own language, customs, and beliefs. Since then, anthropologists have tried to piece together their history and have learned that the Dogon are descended from a group of people who migrated to Mali around 1000 AD. Since then, they've built impressive granaries, raised cattle, and developed one of the most complex systems of beliefs in Africa. Some of their myths and legends are so bizarre that they sound like they could be made up. But that's part of what makes the Dogon people so fascinating. They've managed to preserve their culture and way of life for centuries, and they continue to thrive today. If you think ancient Egypt is impressive, just wait until you hear about this. In the southeastern part of Turkey, there's an archaeological site called Göbekli Tepe. It was discovered in 1963, but scientists say that it was built over 11,000 years ago. That's even older than Stonehenge, which was built around 3000 BC, and the pyramids, which were built between 2580 and 2560 BC. This makes Göbekli Tepe the oldest temple of the gods ever discovered. So how did they build this place? And why did they bury it? And most importantly, who built it? In this video, we explore the discovery of Göbekli Tepe and what it tells us about the dawn of human civilization. But before we get started, be sure to hit that like button for more videos about archaeology and ancient history. Let's go back to the beginning. The story of Göbekli Tepe begins with a shepherd named Ibrahim. While tending his flock in the 1960s, he noticed some strange formations in the ground near the top of the mountain. He saw large stones arranged in circles, along with other curious objects like animal bones and tools made from different types of stone. Curious, Ibrahim showed these objects to a local museum curator who brought in archaeologists to excavate the site. But when they arrived, they found that the area had already been disturbed by treasure hunters. So it wasn't easy to tell where the artifacts came from or what they were used for. However, after years of careful digging, researchers uncovered a large structure made up of T-shaped pillars that had been buried underground for thousands of years. They realized they had stumbled upon something truly special. They realized they had found the remnants of the world's oldest temple. But there was a lot more to Göbekli Tepe than they had expected. As excavations continued, archaeologists uncovered more and more secrets about this mysterious site. They found that the pillars were decorated with carvings of animals such as bulls, lions, and gazelles. They also found evidence of human activity dating back to the 10th millennium BC. This is long before the invention of writing, agriculture, or even pottery. It was during this time that humans began to settle down and live in one place year-round. They started raising crops and domesticating animals, and eventually developed complex societies. Scientists believe that Göbekli Tepe may have been a religious center where people came to worship the gods. Some scholars suggest that the site was used for ceremonies related to fertility and the cycle of seasons. Others believe that it was a burial ground for important members of society. But exactly how people lived at the time is unknown because no written records have survived. All we have are the physical remains of their settlements and artifacts. Even so, archaeologists have pieced together a fairly detailed picture of life at Göbekli Tepe. For example, they found that the settlement was surrounded by a thick wall made of mud brick. Inside the wall was a network of buildings made from wood and stone. These structures included houses, workshops, and storage areas. Researchers also found evidence that the people who lived here kept livestock, including sheep, goats, and cattle. They also hunted wild animals for food, such as deer and wild boar. In addition to the animal bones found by Ibrahim, archaeologists also uncovered the remains of plants that were used for food, such as wheat and barley. They also found evidence that the people who lived here ate fish and shellfish, suggesting that they may have lived near a body of water. But perhaps the most interesting thing about Göbekli Tepe is the pillars. These massive stones were erected during the 10th millennium BC, making them older than the Egyptian pyramids by almost 7,000 years. The pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals and other figures. Researchers believe that these carvings had a religious or spiritual significance, but they don't know exactly what they represent. It is possible that the pillars were used to represent the gods, or that they were meant to depict the ancestors of the people who lived here. Whatever their purpose, the pillars are a testament to the ingenuity of the people who built them. To create these structures, they would have needed to work together in large groups and use sophisticated tools and techniques. But what happened to them? Why did they abandon this place? And what happened to the people who lived here? There's no written record of the history of Göbekli Tepe. We don't know what happened to the people who built it or why they abandoned it. We also don't know if they were wiped out by a natural disaster or if they simply moved away. However, we do know that the site was deliberately buried. After the inhabitants of Göbekli Tepe abandoned it, they took great pains to hide it from view. They covered it with layers of dirt and debris, making it almost invisible to outsiders. It is possible that they did this to protect their sacred site from desecration or to keep it hidden from their enemies. Whatever the reason, their efforts were successful for thousands of years. It wasn't until the 1960s, when Ibrahim stumbled upon the site by accident, that the world learned about the existence of Göbekli Tepe. Since then, the site has undergone several excavations, and we've learned a lot about the people who built it and the way they lived. But there's still much that we don't know. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding Göbekli Tepe is the identity of the people who built it. We don't know where they came from or what language they spoke. We also don't know what happened to them. Did they move away, or were they wiped out by a natural disaster? Another mystery is the purpose of the site itself. We don't know for sure whether it was a temple, a burial ground, or something else entirely. We also don't know what the carvings on the pillars represent or what rituals, if any, took place here. There are many other mysteries surrounding Göbekli Tepe, such as how the massive pillars were erected and what role, if any, the site played in the development of human civilization. For example, we know that Göbekli Tepe predates the invention of agriculture, pottery, and even the wheel. Yet the people who built it constructed massive structures made of intricately carved stone. This suggests that they had a sophisticated understanding of the world around them and the ability to plan and execute complex projects. We also know that Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, as though its builders wanted to hide it from future generations. This raises questions about why they felt the need to do so and what they were trying to hide. Today, Göbekli Tepe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most important archaeological sites in the world. It's open to the public, but access is limited to preserve the site. Each year, thousands of visitors come to Göbekli Tepe to see the fascinating ruins of this mysterious temple. Many of them are archaeologists and historians who come to learn more about the site and the people who built it. Others are simply curious tourists who want to experience the wonder of this ancient place for themselves. No matter why they come, all visitors are sure to be impressed by the grandeur of Göbekli Tepe and the many mysteries that surround it. One of the most exciting things about Göbekli Tepe is the potential for new discoveries. Every year, archaeologists return to the site to continue their excavations, and they're always finding new and interesting things. For example, in recent years, they've discovered more animal bones, tools, and other artifacts that shed light on the daily lives of the people who lived here. They've also found more evidence of human activity, which suggests that Göbekli Tepe was occupied for longer than we previously thought. It's possible that we only just beginning to scratch the surface of what Göbekli Tepe has to teach us. With each new discovery, we learn more about the people who built this mysterious temple and the way they lived. And who knows what other secrets Göbekli Tepe is hiding. Maybe one day we'll uncover the true purpose of the site or find out what happened to the people who built it. Until then, Göbekli Tepe will continue to fascinate archaeologists and curious tourists alike. What do you think? What secrets do you think Göbekli Tepe is hiding? Let me know in the comments below. Teotihuacan, Machu Picchu, Petra, Angkor. There are some ancient sites around the world that need no introduction. You may not be able to pronounce them, but when you see the pyramids of Teotihuacan, the lost city of Petra, or the sprawling ruins of Angkor, you'll know exactly where you are. These ancient cities are amongst the most spectacular archaeological sites on Earth. But there are other sites which are just as impressive, if not more so, yet remain relatively unknown. And one such place is this. It looks like your standard dusty old ruin, doesn't it? A few random bricks here, a broken vase there. Oh, and what about all of that? No, it isn't a modern city dump. This was once Harappa, a sprawling metropolis and the second largest city of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. It was here, in what is now Pakistan, that over 7,000 years ago, one of the largest civilizations in ancient history thrived. They had cities full of indoor plumbing, organized grids, sewage systems, and town planning on par with modern cities. Yet somehow they've managed to be almost completely forgotten by history. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the channel. The Indus Valley civilization was one of the world's first great cradles of civilization. It was also one of the largest and most influential civilizations in ancient history. At its peak around 2,600 years ago, it covered much of what is today Pakistan and northwest India. In fact, at its greatest extent, it was almost as large as ancient China, only slightly smaller than the Roman Empire at the height of its power, and about the same size as contemporary Mesopotamia. Despite being one of the largest civilizations in human history, however, the Indus people are almost completely unknown. To most people, Their name hasn't even made it into mainstream history books. But how did this incredible civilization rise to prominence? How did they plan their cities with such advanced design? And what happened to them? Today we're going to take a deep dive into the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the greatest civilizations you've never heard of. As we already mentioned, the Indus Valley Civilization covered much of what is today Pakistan and northwest India. The civilization spanned a vast area of over 1 million square kilometers. As such, it's rather difficult to pinpoint exactly where it began. We do know that the earliest settlements date back to around 700 BC, making it one of the oldest civilizations in the region, rivaled only by the Norte Chico culture in Peru. However, these early settlements were small agricultural villages, and it wasn't until several thousand years later that the civilization would begin to take shape. Around 3300 BCE, a new settlement began to take shape along the banks of the river Ravi in what is today Pakistan. This settlement would become the first true city of the Indus Valley Civilization, and we call it the Mother City. From here, the civilization radiated outward, establishing trade routes across the region and founding dozens of new cities. Two of the most important cities would be Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. These two cities were the jewels of the Indus Valley Civilization, each home to hundreds of thousands of people. To this day, we're still discovering new things about these cities. What we can say for sure, however, is that they were built on an incredibly grand scale. Mohenjo-daro, meaning Mound of the Dead, was laid out in a perfect grid pattern with wide roads every 250 meters and public buildings every 400. The entire city was meticulously planned and astonishingly well organized. Even the houses followed the same style, usually with an inner courtyard, multiple rooms, and even bathrooms with drains. But it was Harappa, meaning as usual, that really took city planning to the next level. While Mohenjo-daro had public baths, a sophisticated brick factory, and some of the earliest examples of plumbing in the world, Harappa had even more. The city was divided into two halves, one for commoners and one for elites, a feature that's remarkably similar to the layout of many ancient Mesopotamian cities, suggesting the possibility of cultural exchange between the two regions. But what truly set Harappa apart from every other city of the time was its comprehensive urban design. Harappa was the world's first planned city. Every aspect of the city was carefully thought out. There were designated areas for shops, administrative buildings, shrines, and even open spaces for leisure activities. There was also a huge public bathhouse here, which has been described as the biggest man-made pool in the world. It measured approximately 118 feet by 66 feet, almost as big as Olympic swimming pools. The city also boasted a highly advanced drainage system that could easily keep up with the needs of a 500,000-strong population. In fact, this drainage system was even more advanced than those found in contemporary cities like Mohenjo-daro and even some ancient cities thousands of years later like Rome. But as grand as these cities were, archaeologists have only scratched the surface of the Indus Valley Civilization. Why? Well, because archaeologists can only discover so much without knowing how to read the script of the civilization. That's right. Despite having existed for over 1,000 years, writing the Indus Valley Civilization remains wholly undeciphered. The only clue we have as to who they were is a series of 40 mysterious symbols etched onto a piece of pottery. Known as the Indus script, the symbols have been found on seals, jewelry, and even weapons, but they've never been deciphered. Scholars believe that the language used in the script is related to ancient Persian or Hindi, but nobody knows for sure. What we do know is that the Indus script was remarkably standardized across the civilization, suggesting a shared culture and identity among the various city-states of the Indus Valley Civilization. If the script was ever decoded, it's possible that we would learn a lot more about the civilization, including what they called themselves. For all we know, they may not have even called themselves the Indus people. Instead, they may have had a name for themselves that's been lost to history. Although we may never know much about the Indus Valley Civilization itself, we do know quite a bit about the end of the civilization. Around 1900 BCE, both Harappan and Mohenjo-daro were abandoned. Over the next few centuries, the civilization fragmented, leading to a collapse in trade and a general decline in living standards. But why did this happen? Well, there's evidence to suggest that climate change may have played a major role. During the peak of the civilization, it's believed that the monsoon rains were more reliable, leading to an increase in agriculture and a rapid growth in population. But around the time of the civilization's collapse, the monsoon rains became less reliable, leading to widespread drought and famine. Evidence of this can be seen in the pollen records from the region, which show a significant decrease in vegetation during the late Harappan period. But while this may explain the beginning of the end for the civilization, it doesn't explain the suddenness of the collapse. Both cities were seemingly abandoned overnight. It is unlikely that a slow decline caused by drought would have led to such a drastic abandonment of the cities. For this reason, some scholars have suggested that the cities may have been destroyed by an invading army. Interestingly, the two cities were likely destroyed at different times by different groups. At Mohenjo-Daro, there's evidence of an invading force entering the city and burning it to the ground. Meanwhile, at Harappa, there's evidence of a more prolonged siege, including burnt bricks and a layer of ash. Whoever attacked Harappa must have laid siege to the city for some time before finally conquering it. We don't know who these invaders were or where they came from, though many scholars believe that they may have been part of the Aryan migration into the region. According to the traditional view, a group of nomadic tribes known as the Aryans migrated into the Indus Valley around this time and conquered the native Indus people, forcing them to flee or submit. Some historians even claim that the Indus people were the mythical land of darkness mentioned in the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. If this is true, then it's possible that the Indus people were simply absorbed into Indian society after the Aryan invasion, explaining why there's so little trace of them today. Unfortunately, we may never know for sure what happened to the Indus Valley civilization, nor may we ever fully understand this advanced and enigmatic society. But as more and more discoveries are made, we can be sure of one thing: the Indus Valley civilization was one of the most remarkable civilizations of the ancient world. Its cities were meticulously planned, its infrastructure was incredibly advanced, and its people were clearly highly skilled. Yet despite all of this, the civilization has been largely forgotten. So what can we learn from the Indus Valley civilization? Perhaps it's a lesson in humility. Even the most advanced and sophisticated civilizations can fall, and even the greatest empires can be forgotten. Or perhaps it's a lesson in resilience. The Indus Valley civilization endured for over 1,000 years, and its cities were home to some of the most advanced technology of their day. Whatever lessons we may take away from the Indus Valley civilization, one thing is for sure: this ancient civilization deserves to be remembered. The Kingdom of Punt was one of the wealthiest civilizations known to the ancient Egyptians, but it has never been found. In fact, no physical trace of its existence has ever been discovered. And yet there are plenty of clues in ancient Egyptian records that tell us all about it. Welcome to my channel. Today we're exploring the land of the gods. King Solomon's legendary wealth is often measured by his fabled riches. How much is a gamash worth anyway? But the legendary wealth of this African king might not have even been his own. Maybe he got it all from Punt. Punt was an exotic kingdom known only through tales brought back by traders and explorers. It was rich in gold, incense, exotic animals, and beautiful women, and the pharaohs of Egypt knew they had to have it. Much of what we know about the mysterious country comes from an ancient Egyptian stele erected by King Amenhotep III at the entrance to his temple complex at Karnak. It depicts the pharaoh seated on a throne between two pharaohs who came before him, probably his father and grandfather. In front of them is a table covered with exotic foods, flowers, and goods from Punt. The Egyptians must have thought of the kingdom as the land of the gods because many of these gifts were used in religious ceremonies. Here are some of the items listed in the writings accompanying the statue that scholars believe may have come from Punt. Myrrh. Myrrh was an aromatic resin prized by Egyptians for use in perfumes and as a natural preservative. Gold. Need I say more? Baboons. These must have been very special baboons because the text calls them the baboons of the gods. Ebony. This strong, dense wood was used in making furniture and statues. Ivory. Mainly used for jewelry and ornaments. Dogs. Not sure if they meant pets or something else, but dogs from Punt were clearly highly valued. Incense. Frankincense was another key trading item from the region. Silver. Always useful. And the most important export, according to Egyptian records, women. According to the texts at Karnak, women from Punt were the most beautiful in the world, and their presence at the royal court was highly desired. Many ancient Egyptian queens were said to be from Punt, including the legendary Queen of Sheba. But where was this legendary kingdom located? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is a big fat maybe. Most historians agree that it did exist and that it was located somewhere along the coast of the Red Sea, perhaps in present-day Somalia or Eritrea. But there is no archaeological evidence of any major civilization existing in these regions during the time period in which the Egyptians traded with them. And so the mystery remains. So let's take a closer look at the two leading theories for the location of Punt. First, let's head down to East Africa. If you've ever traveled to Africa, you know that the continent is huge and diverse. The area we are talking about today is tiny in comparison. However, we can still find some pretty interesting places there. So let's start our journey in Somalia. Somalia is located on the eastern edge of Africa, bordering Ethiopia to the west, Kenya to the south, and the Indian Ocean to the east. The country is mostly known for its long coastline, which stretches for over 3,000 kilometers. In recent years, Somalia has become infamous for being home to pirates who prey on ships passing through the Gulf of Aden. But this is not the first time that the waters around Somalia have been a hotbed for activity. In the 8th century BC, the kingdom of Punt flourished here and dominated trade routes connecting Africa and Asia. Their main exports were ivory, gold, incense, and exotic animals, which they traded with the Egyptians. To this day, there are no confirmed traces of the kingdom's existence in the archaeological record. However, researchers argue that this is simply due to the lack of excavations carried out in Somalia, not proof that it never existed. Some scholars also point out that the landscape of the Horn of Africa has changed drastically since the days of Punt. For example, the island of Mogadiscio, also known as the Island of the Moon, was once a large landmass connected to the mainland. This means that the modern-day islands of Somalia could have actually been part of the mainland when Punt was located there. It also means that archaeological sites from Punt may be buried under centuries of volcanic ash from nearby Erta Ale, one of the world's most active volcanoes. If you ask me, the idea of an ancient kingdom existing in Somalia is pretty intriguing. After all, the country has been inhabited for thousands of years, and there is still so much we don't know about it. Unfortunately, the ongoing conflict and instability make it difficult to carry out the kind of archaeological research that would be necessary to confirm or deny the theory. Now let's travel north to Eritrea. Eritrea is a small country located on the Red Sea coast of northeastern Africa. It borders Sudan to the west, Ethiopia to the south, and the Red Sea to the east. The country is home to a number of important historical sites, including the ancient city of Aksum, which was once the capital of the Kingdom of Aksum. The Kingdom of Aksum was a major player in the ancient world. From its strategic location on the Red Sea, the kingdom controlled trade routes connecting the Mediterranean Sea to India. This made it incredibly wealthy and powerful. And just like the Kingdom of Punt, it had a thing for sending its young women to live in Egypt. However, unlike Punt, we have plenty of archaeological evidence to prove that the Kingdom of Aksum really did exist. We know that it flourished in the 4th century AD and that it played a major role in the spread of Christianity throughout Africa. Unfortunately, we don't know much about the kingdom before this time period, and so it's hard to say whether or not it was the legendary Kingdom of Punt. What do you think? Do you think the Kingdom of Punt really existed? Or is it nothing but a figment of the ancient Egyptians' imagination? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. The Egyptians had quite a bit of contact with other cultures, including the Nubians to the south and the Levantines to the east. But none of these contacts were as mysterious or as exciting as their dealings with the people of Punt. What we do know is that the Egyptians kept detailed records of their interactions with this exotic land and its people. And by studying these records, we can piece together a fascinating picture of one of the most enigmatic civilizations known to the ancient Egyptians, the Kingdom of Punt. The Egyptians first encountered the Kingdom of Punt during the reign of Pharaoh Senusret III, who ruled from 1878 to 1841 BC. According to the Turin King list, Senusret III launched a military campaign into Punt and returned with gold, silver, ebony, ivory, and precious stones. His son, Amenemhat III, continued this trend of trade and exploration, launching his own expedition to Punt. It was during Amenemhat III's reign that the Egyptians began to develop a taste for myrrh, which they used in religious ceremonies and as a perfume ingredient. The next pharaoh to make contact with Punt was Thutmose III, who reigned from 1479 to 1425 BC. Thutmose III was one of the most successful military leaders in ancient Egyptian history, and his campaigns took him as far away as Syria and Nubia. However, he also maintained a strong trading relationship with Punt, sending expeditions there for gold, incense, and exotic animals. The New Kingdom was a golden age for Egypt, both politically and economically. The pharaohs were more powerful than ever before, and their wealth was unmatched. As a result, the demand for luxury goods from distant lands grew exponentially, and Punt was one of the main suppliers of these goods. It was during the reign of Hatshepsut that Egypt experienced a surge in trade with Punt. Hatshepsut was one of the most famous pharaohs in history, and her reign was marked by great prosperity. In fact, she is often referred to as the female pharaoh because she was one of the few women who ruled Egypt in ancient times. Hatshepsut's love for Punt was no secret. She commissioned several expeditions there and even built a temple in her own honor in the city of Jardim. The reign of Ramesses II was another highlight in the relationship between Egypt and Punt. Ramesses II was the second longest reigning pharaoh in Egyptian history, and he was responsible for some of the most impressive building projects of the era. He built temples, palaces, and monuments all over Egypt, and he even constructed a new capital city called Pyromnes. But Ramesses II was also a great trader, and he maintained strong ties with Punt. In fact, he is believed to have visited the country himself, and he returned with so much gold that it practically became worthless for a few years. The last pharaoh to maintain a close relationship with Punt was Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun is perhaps the most famous pharaoh in history, and his tomb was the first to be discovered by modern archaeologists in 1922. Tutankhamun's reign was relatively short, lasting only 9 years. However, in that short time, he managed to cement his place in history. One of Tutankhamun's main accomplishments was the restoration of traditional religion. Before his reign, Egypt had gone through a period of religious upheaval as the traditional gods had been replaced by a single deity named Aten. But Tutankhamun restored the old religion, and he did so in a way that pleased everyone. He was seen as a champion of the old gods, and he was celebrated for his piety and devotion. One of the ways in which Tutankhamun showed his devotion to the gods was through his support of trade with Punt. In fact, he is believed to have sent a mission to Punt in search of rare materials to use in building temples and monuments. This shows just how important trade with Punt was to the Egyptian empire. Even a young pharaoh like Tutankhamun understood the importance of maintaining good relations with this exotic land. The year is 376 BC. The place is Athens, Greece, and you're at a party. It's one of those parties that only the ancient Greeks could throw, full of wine, poetry, music, philosophy, and debate. And the topic of debate is Atlantis. As everyone knows, Atlantis is the legendary island kingdom first described by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work The Atlantic. According to Plato, Atlantis was an actual place situated in the Atlantic Ocean, an advanced and prosperous civilization that existed around 9,000 years before his time. It was home to a utopian society with impressive architecture, technology, and art, but it was destroyed by a natural disaster that submerged the island and its people into the ocean depths. But what if I told you that there might be more evidence for Atlantis than Plato's text? What if there really was a rich seafaring civilization, just like he described, that lived near the Strait of Gibraltar, ruled over by a queen that had colonies all over the Mediterranean, and that made huge strides in mathematics, astronomy, and culture? A civilization that, according to some scholars, was not only real, but the inspiration for Plato's Atlantis. The civilization is called Tartessos. Hello, and welcome to this channel. Today we are talking about Tartessos, the most mysterious civilization in ancient Iberia. So let's get started. In the Western Mediterranean, scattered between the modern nations of Spain and Portugal, lies an area known as Tartessos. But there are very few places in the world that have such a mysterious past. The name Tartessos comes from the Greeks, who adapted the name from the Phoenicians. And little did they know when they named it after their god of the sea, that this would become the name of the most renowned seafaring civilization of antiquity. Archaeologists believe that the history of Tartessos dates back to at least the 8th century BC, and that the civilization lasted until the 3rd century BC, though there may have been traces of human habitation dating as far back as the Bronze Age. It was located close to the mouth of the Guadalquivir River and stretched along the coast, as well as inland. Its capital city was Gator, which later became the Roman city of Cadiz. Even though Tartessos may have been contemporary with the great civilizations of Greece and Rome, it remains largely unknown outside of Spain. Most of what we know about it comes from classical texts such as those of the Greeks and Romans. It mentions Tartessos many times, describing it as a place of wealth and prosperity, as well as a center of trade and commerce. But despite its fame and antiquity, little physical evidence of its existence has been found. In fact, archaeologists have struggled to locate any archaeological sites or artifacts that can be definitively linked to the civilization. That is, until recently. Since 2011, a series of excavations have revealed new insights into the civilization of Tartessos. Archaeologists uncovered several important finds, including a huge necropolis with hundreds of tombs and a vast urban settlement that may have been the capital of the entire civilization. The most exciting discovery was perhaps the largest collection of silver coins ever found in such a large quantity from pre-Roman Spain. These coins date back to the 5th century BC and bear the image of a deer on one side and a female figure on the other. This suggests that the civilization of Tartessos was not only wealthy, but also had a sophisticated coinage system that rivaled those of the Greeks and Romans. Another interesting find was a huge temple complex dedicated to a deity known as Ekheka. The temple dates back to the 6th century BC and is one of the oldest examples of monumental architecture in the region. These recent discoveries have helped to shed light on the culture and history of Tartessos, but there is still much that remains unknown. The civilization's origins are shrouded in mystery, and its eventual fate is also unclear. Some scholars believe that Tartessos was founded by Phoenician sailors who arrived in the region around the 8th century BC. Others argue that it was the product of a long process of cultural evolution involving the indigenous peoples of Iberia. What is clear, however, is that Tartessos was a highly maritime civilization that relied heavily on trade and exploration. They established colonies throughout the Mediterranean, including in the Aegean Sea and North Africa, and they were known for their expertise in shipbuilding and navigation. Their ships were large and sturdy, capable of carrying heavy loads over long distances, and their sailors were skilled navigators, able to traverse the open seas without the aid of modern technology. This is where Tartessos becomes very similar to Plato's Atlantis. Both civilizations were known for their seafaring traditions and their wealth. Both were said to have colonies all over the Mediterranean, and both were allegedly wiped out by a catastrophic flood. According to Plato, the Atlanteans lived in peace and harmony until they became arrogant and overextended their power. As punishment, the gods sent a terrible earthquake and a great flood which destroyed their cities and drowned their people. The surviving Atlanteans fled to other parts of the world, taking their culture and knowledge with them. Could something similar have happened to Tartessos? Well, there is some evidence to support this theory. In the early 6th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote that the Tartessian people were one of the wealthiest in the world. They were famous for their silver mines, and their exports included silver, tin, and lead. But in the 4th century BC, the Carthaginians invaded Tartessos and sacked its cities. According to some sources, the flooding of Tartessos may have occurred at this time. There is also evidence of a catastrophic flood in the geological record. A team of researchers led by Antonio José Cozinha from the University of Seville analyzed sediments from the seabed near the Strait of Gibraltar and discovered a layer of mud that dated back to the 4th century BC. This layer contained a high concentration of silver, indicating that it may have come from the flooding of Tartessos. Additionally, the researchers found that the flood was so massive that it caused significant changes in the environment of the region. Sea levels rose, rivers changed course, and coastal areas were inundated. However, it is important to note that the exact cause of the flooding is unknown. Some scholars have suggested that it may have been caused by a tsunami, while others believe that it may have been the result of a storm surge. Still, others argue that it may have been caused by a combination of factors, including rising sea levels, heavy rainfall, and strong winds. So what happened to the people of Tartessos? Did they perish in the flood, or did they survive and flee to other parts of the world? Unfortunately, the answer to this question remains a mystery. There is no archaeological evidence of a mass exodus or a sudden disappearance of the population. and there is no written record of what happened to them. One theory is that they were absorbed into other cultures, such as the Celtiberians or the Carthaginians. Another theory is that they simply assimilated into the local population and their culture was lost over time. The civilization of Tartessos is a fascinating example of the many mysteries that surround the ancient world. While there is still much that we do not know about this civilization, the recent discoveries by Spanish archaeologists have helped to bring it to life in a way that previous generations could not have imagined. As more research is conducted and more artifacts are uncovered, we may learn even more about this mysterious civilization and its possible connection to the legendary Atlantis. The Hittite Empire, an ancient Anatolian civilization that dominated much of the Middle East around 3,000 years ago. They were Egypt's greatest rival, controlling much of the region at one point, including the Levant and Mesopotamia. But despite being such a prominent force in the ancient world, the Hittites mysteriously vanished from history after their sudden collapse during the Late Bronze Age. In this video, we'll explore who the Hittites were, what made them such a formidable superpower, and ultimately what led to their mysterious demise. So sit back, grab your popcorn, and join me on this journey through time as we uncover the secrets of the lost Hittite Empire. The Hittite Empire was an ancient civilization that flourished in Anatolia, which is now Turkey, during the Late Bronze Age, roughly from 1600 to 1178 BC. Despite their relatively short existence, they left an indelible mark on history, becoming the first major power in Anatolia and one of the dominant forces in the ancient Near East. The Hittite language, which is considered the oldest Indo-European language attested in the archaeological record, still holds many secrets, and scholars are still working to decipher its mysteries. What we know about the Hittites comes primarily from their capital city of Hattusa, located in central Anatolia, where a significant portion of their history was written. The city served as a hub of political, economic, and cultural activity for the empire. During their peak in the 13th century BC, the Hittite Empire stretched from the Mediterranean Sea in the west to the Armenian highlands in the east, encompassing parts of modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. The empire was home to a diverse range of people, including the Hurrians, Kaska, Lukka, and the Sea peoples, among others, all of whom contributed to the rich cultural tapestry of the Hittite world. Despite their vast empire, the Hittites were not a monolithic entity. Instead, they were a loose confederation of smaller states and local rulers who acknowledged the suzerainty of the central government in Hattusa. This decentralized structure allowed for greater local autonomy while still maintaining a sense of unity under the broader Hittite identity. The Hittite Empire is often remembered for its military prowess, boasting one of the most powerful armies of the ancient world. Their military success can be attributed to several factors, including their strategic location in Anatolia, which provided access to vital trade routes and resources, as well as their skilled use of chariots and iron weapons. The Hittites were also known for their diplomatic skills, forging alliances and treaties with neighboring kingdoms. Perhaps their most famous diplomatic achievement was the first recorded peace treaty in history, which they signed with the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II in 1258 BC. The treaty, known as the Treaty of Kadesh, ended a conflict between the two empires and established a framework for peaceful coexistence. The Hittite economy was primarily based on agriculture, with farming communities producing crops such as wheat, barley, and vegetables. Trade played a significant role in the Hittite economy, as merchants traveled throughout the empire and beyond, exchanging goods such as textiles, metalwork, and luxury items. The Hittites also had a strong tradition of craftsmanship, with skilled artisans producing high-quality goods that were prized throughout the ancient world. The Hittite religion was a polytheistic faith that incorporated elements of local Anatolian beliefs as well as those brought by Indo-European migrants. The chief god of the Hittite pantheon was a storm god named Tezhub, who was associated with the sky, weather, and fertility. Other important deities included the sun goddess, Arina, and the weather god, Tarhunt. The Hittites also venerated a number of local deities, reflecting the diversity of their empire. The Hittite kings traditionally held hereditary titles such as the Great King, Son of the Sun God, and Lord of Lands. They were considered both political and religious leaders, with the king acting as the representative of the gods on earth. Some of the most notable Hittite kings include Hattusili I, who founded the New Kingdom period and expanded the empire significantly. Mursalai II, known for his military campaigns and the introduction of the first known royal dynasty in Anatolia. Suppiluliuma I, who established the Hittite Empire as a major power in the region and played a key role in expanding their territory. The Hittite legal system was influenced by both local customs and the empire's diverse population. Laws covered a wide range of topics, including family matters, property rights, and criminal offenses. The Hittites also developed one of the earliest known systems of law, the Code of Hammurabi, which was inscribed on a stele found at Eshnunna in present-day Iran. Egyptian records show that the Egyptians traded extensively with the Hittites, exchanging goods such as gold, ivory, and exotic animals. The two empires also engaged in diplomatic missions, with officials from each kingdom visiting the other to discuss trade agreements, alliances, or peace negotiations. One of the most famous examples of Egyptian-Hittite relations was the meeting between Ramesses II and Hattusili III in 1258 BC, which resulted in the first recorded peace treaty in history. The Egyptians and the Hittites shared a deep mutual respect that transcended their rivalry. Both empires were renowned for their military strength, and their rulers saw the value in establishing peaceful relations. The Egyptians admired the Hittite horses and chariots, while the Hittites respected the Egyptian pharaohs and their advanced technology. Despite their rivalry, both empires recognized the benefits of trade and diplomacy, and they worked to maintain a balance of power in the region. Now let's move on to what you've been waiting for. How did the Hittites vanish from history? The Hittite Empire's collapse during the Late Bronze Age was a pivotal event in ancient history. This period, which lasted from approximately 3300 to 1200 BC, witnessed the decline and fall of numerous prominent civilizations, including the Mycenaean Greeks, the New Kingdom of Egypt, and the Hittite Empire. While the exact causes of the Hittite collapse remain uncertain, several theories have been proposed by historians and archaeologists. One widely accepted theory is that the empire's demise resulted from internal strife and external pressures. As the Hittite state became increasingly decentralized, local rulers gained more autonomy, leading to fragmentation and instability. External threats, including the rise of the Assyrians and the Kaska people, further weakened the empire, creating conditions for its ultimate collapse. Another compelling theory attributes the Hittite collapse to environmental factors such as climate change and natural disasters. Some scholars argue that a shift in climate, perhaps due to changes in rainfall patterns or the destruction of forests for agricultural use, led to widespread drought and famine, which in turn undermined the empire's stability. Natural disasters such as earthquakes or volcanic eruptions could have also contributed to the collapse by causing widespread devastation and disrupting agricultural production. The Kaska, an enigmatic people believed to be related to the Phrygians, emerged as a significant threat to the Hittite Empire during the Late Bronze Age. Originating from the Armenian highlands, the Kaska expanded into Anatolia around the 12th century BC, coinciding with the decline of the Hittite state. Their equestrian lifestyle and military prowess made them formidable opponents, and they played a pivotal role in the disintegration of the Hittite heartland. The Kaska invasions disrupted the political, economic, and social structures of the Hittite Empire, contributing to its ultimate collapse. The Kaska presence is prominently featured in contemporary texts such as the Egyptian records of Merneptah's campaign in Syria, which mention the Kaska among the defeated foes. However, the scarcity of archaeological evidence regarding the Kaska has left many aspects of their culture and history shrouded in mystery. Theories regarding their appearance, language, and origins remain speculative, and their impact on the collapse of the Hittite Empire is still debated among scholars. Nevertheless, the Kaska played a significant role in the geopolitical dynamics of the Late Bronze Age, leaving an enduring mark on the history of Anatolia. As the Hittite Empire crumbled during the Late Bronze Age collapse, the Kaska established dominance over large portions of Anatolia, reshaping the political landscape of the region. Their influence extended to areas once controlled by the Hittites, and they exerted their power over the remnants of the Hittite states. The Kaska presence in Anatolia during this period is evidenced by archaeological findings such as the Kaska Gate at Hattusa, the former Hittite capital, which bears inscriptions indicating their occupation of the site. This occupation suggests that the Casca actively participated in the political affairs of the region, consolidating their control over key areas. During the following Iron Age, the Casca continued to exert their influence in Anatolia, coming into contact with the expanding Assyrian Empire. Their interactions with the Assyrians are documented in Assyrian texts that refer to the Casca as a formidable and warlike people. The Assyrians' campaigns against the Casca demonstrate the latter's military strength and territorial extent, highlighting their significance as a regional power. Unfortunately, the Casca's lack of written records and the scarcity of archaeological evidence have left many aspects of their culture, origins, and language unknown. This obscurity has fueled speculation and theories among scholars, but definitive answers remain elusive. Today, the Hittite Empire stands as a testament to the power and influence of ancient Anatolia. Their contributions to history, including their legal system, art, and diplomacy, continue to fascinate scholars and enthusiasts alike. While their sudden collapse during the Late Bronze Age remains a mystery, ongoing research and discoveries continue to shed light on this enigmatic civilization. As we continue to uncover the secrets of the Hittite Empire, we gain a deeper understanding of the rich tapestry of human history and the lasting impact of ancient Anatolia on our world today. Around 1200 BC, something horrible happened. In a span of just a few decades, a wave of destruction wiped out several ancient civilizations. Entire cities were abandoned, and the populations of many countries shrank dramatically. It was one of the darkest periods in human history, and it had a profound effect on our world today. It called the Bronze Age collapse, and it destroyed some of the most powerful civilizations in the world at the time, including the Hittites, the New Kingdom of Egypt, the Mycenaean civilization in Greece, the Kassite Empire in Mesopotamia, and many others. Whole regions that had been home to millions of people became empty wastelands almost overnight. But there's one thing that makes this period even weirder than all that. As terrible as all that is, it's not the whole story. You see, this wave of destruction wasn't felt equally around the world. For example, the civilizations of Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Levant were basically obliterated. But just to the east, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was completely unaffected. In fact, they were thriving. The same goes for the civilizations in Greece and Italy. They were basically untouched by this collapse. As you can see, there's a lot of questions here and no good answers. So over the years, many theories have been proposed to try and explain what happened. And today, we're going to dive into them. Now, before we get into the possible causes of the Bronze Age collapse, it's important that we first cover some basics. First of all, when exactly did it happen? Well, according to the best available evidence, the worst of it took place between 1200 and 1175 BC. That's only 3 decades. Secondly, what exactly do we mean by Bronze Age? Well, in archaeology, the Bronze Age refers to a period of time that dates roughly from 3300 BC to 1200 BC. It was a time when societies around the world transitioned from making tools out of stone to making them out of bronze. It was an important step in human history because bronze is stronger than stone, and it allowed humans to do more with their tools. This led to big changes in agriculture, warfare, and culture. However, while the Bronze Age began around 3300 BC, the Bronze Age collapse specifically refers to the end of the Bronze Age in the Near East and the Mediterranean. It wasn't a global phenomenon. For example, people in what is now China continued to use bronze tools 2,000 years later. And so for that reason, historians often refer to the Bronze Age collapse as a regional term. With that in mind, let's look at how the Bronze Age ended in the Near East and the Mediterranean. According to historical records, the Bronze Age saw the rise of several great empires and kingdoms. In particular, there were 3 that stood out. The first was the Hittite Empire, which was centered in what is now Turkey. At its peak, it stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf. Next, we have the New Kingdom of Egypt, which ruled over the entire northeastern part of Africa. Finally, there was the Mycenaean civilization, which was located on the southern tip of the Peloponnese Peninsula in Greece. These 3 civilizations dominated the region during the Late Bronze Age. They controlled most of the trade, and they fought constant wars with each other. However, around 1200 BC, all 3 of these powers mysteriously collapsed. In Egypt, the old royal line came to an end and the country descended into civil war. The Hittites mysteriously disappeared, and in Mycenaean Greece, their great palaces were burned to the ground. But again, it wasn't the whole story. The collapse affected some civilizations much harder than others. In fact, in some places, life barely changed at all. The Neo-Assyrian Empire in Mesopotamia, for example, didn't experience any problems during the Bronze Age collapse. Their economy remained strong, their population remained large, and their king list has no gaps during the relevant years. The same goes for the civilizations in Greece and Italy. Life went on pretty much as normal for them too. So what happened? What caused such massive devastation in some places, but not in others? Well, as I said earlier, historians have put forward a number of different theories to try and answer this question. But really, it was probably a combination of factors. Let's take a look at the leading candidates. The first is climate change. One theory is that the Bronze Age collapse was caused by rapid climate change. According to this theory, between 1200 and 1150 BC, there was a sudden and dramatic shift in the climate, perhaps due to a volcanic eruption or a change in the Earth's orbit. This would have led to colder temperatures and less rainfall, which would have made it difficult to grow crops. In turn, this would have caused widespread famine and social unrest, which could explain why so many civilizations collapsed at the same time. Now, this idea is supported by evidence from the Greenland ice sheet. Between 1200 and 800 BC, there was a noticeable drop in temperature there. Plus, archaeologists have found evidence of drought and famine in the Near East and Eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. However, there are also problems with this theory. For example, the drop in temperature in Greenland was only about 2 degrees Celsius. That's not exactly the kind of change that would cause the end of civilizations. Not to mention, if this theory were true, then we should expect to see evidence of drought and famine in other parts of the world, too. But we don't. Another theory is that the Bronze Age collapse was caused by earthquakes. According to this theory, a series of massive earthquakes struck the region during the Late Bronze Age, causing widespread destruction and social upheaval. There are a couple of pieces of evidence that support this theory. For one, there is evidence that the Eastern Mediterranean was seismically very active during the Late Bronze Age. Secondly, the city of Al-Ashia, which was a major trading partner of the Egyptians, was destroyed by an earthquake sometime around 1200 BC. We know this because the Egyptians kept records of it. Lastly, recent research has shown that the Dead Sea Transform fault line was locked up between 1400 and 900 BC. That means that there was a lot of pressure building up along the fault line, and it was bound to release at some point. However, there are also problems with this theory. For example, if this were true, then we should expect to see evidence of earthquakes in other parts of the world, too. But we don't. On top of that, we have no evidence of earthquakes in the region at that time. Sure, the Eastern Mediterranean is a seismically active area, but that doesn't necessarily mean that earthquakes were a problem at that specific time. After all, there are plenty of places in the world today that are seismically active, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be an earthquake tomorrow, next week, or even next year. Earthquakes are notoriously difficult to predict, which brings us to another theory. Some historians argue that the Bronze Age collapse was caused by the mysterious Sea Peoples. Who were the Sea Peoples? Well, that's actually a good question. The Sea Peoples are a mysterious group of people who attacked the eastern Mediterranean coast during the Late Bronze Age. They first appear in historical records during the reign of Ramesses II of Egypt, but they continued to raid the coast for decades afterward. Their attacks were devastating, and they eventually contributed to the fall of several Late Bronze Age empires. The Egyptians kept detailed records of the Sea People's invasions, and they described them as coming from the sea in ships. They said that the Sea People were a confederation of different peoples who came together to plunder the coast. The Egyptians were able to repel most of their attacks, but they were eventually overwhelmed. In the end, the Sea People sacked several Egyptian cities, and they even managed to conquer parts of Canaan. However, there are also problems with this theory. For example, there's no archaeological evidence of the Sea People. All we have are the Egyptian records. Now, it's possible that the Egyptians were exaggerating the threat posed by the Sea People, or maybe they were trying to cover up the fact that they were being attacked from within. But either way, we just can't say with any certainty who the Sea People were or where they came from. Of course, that hasn't stopped people from trying. One popular theory is that the Sea People were a group of refugees who were fleeing the advancing armies of the Kassites in Mesopotamia. Another theory is that the Sea People were Cretans who were displaced by the Dorian invasion of Greece. Still, another theory is that the Sea People were just ordinary Anatolian sailors who got caught up in the collapse and turned to piracy. But whatever the truth may be, it seems clear that the Sea People played at least some role in the Bronze Age collapse. As you can see, there are a lot of competing theories about what caused the Bronze Age collapse, and none of them are totally satisfactory. If you have a good theory, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. In the end, all we can really say with certainty is that the Bronze Age collapse was a period of tremendous change in the Near East and the Mediterranean. It marked the end of the Bronze Age in the region, and it led to the rise of many new civilizations. It was a dark age in many ways, but it was also a time of great transition and ultimately progress. Every year, archaeologists make incredible discoveries that shed new light on our past. Some finds are more significant than others, and one of the most important of these was made back in 1926. It all began when a Greek archaeologist named Spiridon Marinatos discovered the remains of a lost city submerged beneath the Aegean Sea. He had been searching for the ancient city of Helike, but instead found a massive harbor constructed of stone that dated back to 300 BC. But what really captivated him was the dozens of buildings that surrounded it. Helike had once been a prosperous trading hub, a cultural center, and an important religious sanctuary. But then, according to legend, it vanished into the sea in a single night along with its 50,000 inhabitants. It's a tale that has fascinated people for centuries and may have inspired Plato's description of the lost city of Atlantis. So how could something like this have happened? Well, we'll tell you right after. Ancient Greece, the cradle of Western civilization, was a collection of independent city-states spread across the southern Balkan Peninsula. One of these states was called Achaea, situated in the western part of Greece. At its heart was the city of Helike, which boasted grand temples, extensive fortifications, numerous sanctuaries, and a strategic harbor that made it an ideal trading post. The city even hosted the Helican Games, a festival second only to the Olympic Games. During its peak in the 4th century BC, it was home to around 50,000 people. But in the year 373 BC, everything changed. That's when the Oracle of Delphi, the most revered prophetic center in Greece, announced that the gods were angry with the Achaeans because they hadn't honored them properly during the previous games. Then, just as the Achaeans were making plans to rectify the situation, the unthinkable happened. According to Plutarch, a Greek historian who lived in the 1st century AD, the earth trembled violently. In one version of the story, a tsunami then struck the city, destroying everything in its path. Another version said that the entire landmass sank into the sea, swallowing Helike and its inhabitants whole. Either way, it disappeared from the face of the earth overnight. So where did this story come from? The answer can be found in the writings of Plato, the legendary Greek philosopher. In his text, he describes a vast and opulent island nation that is ultimately destroyed because its citizens abandon virtue and justice. Helike was thought to have existed in the Peloponnese region of Greece, an idea supported by Plutarch's writings. For many years, historians believed that Helike was nothing more than a myth, but archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. In 1926, Spiridon Marinatos set out to find the sunken city. His search led him to the Gulf of Corinth, located between the Peloponnese and the mainland. Here, the seabed was littered with ancient pottery shards and marble sculptures. Soon, he came across the remains of a dock that looked over 2,000 years old. Using a diving suit, he descended into the water and discovered that the harbor had been built using large blocks of limestone. Further exploration revealed dozens of structures, including foundations, paved streets, and rooms filled with furniture. Marinatos realized that this wasn't just a port, it was a whole city. He identified Helike by the remains of 2 temples dedicated to the gods Apollo and Poseidon, both of which were mentioned in ancient texts as being in the city. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. For the first time, they had physical evidence that proved Helike had existed. But there was still one question left to answer. How did it disappear? To find the answer, we have to go back in time to the days leading up to the alleged disaster. In the year 380 BC, the Achaean League, a confederation of city-states in Greece, attacked Helike, hoping to seize control of its lucrative trade routes. The siege lasted for years, and although it ended with Helike emerging victorious, it left the city severely weakened. It was at this point that the Corinthians, another Greek state, seized the opportunity to attack. They continued their assault until Helike fell, at which point they razed the city to the ground and built a wall around it. But soon afterwards, earthquakes struck the region. These tremors loosened the city's foundations, allowing seawater to seep in. And so the harbor began to flood. As more and more water poured in, the residents fled. But it was too late. In a matter of hours, the entire city was underwater. Although Plato exaggerated certain aspects of the story, the basic details are quite similar to what the archaeological record reveals. This leads some people to believe that Helike may have been the inspiration behind the legend of Atlantis. After all, Plato says that the island nation was swallowed by the sea, and that's exactly what happened to Helike. But why did Plato invent the story in the first place? Scholars say he wanted to make a political statement. At the time, Athens was becoming increasingly corrupt. Its democracy was under threat, and its empire was crumbling. So Plato created a fictional city whose downfall was caused by internal strife, a warning for the Athenians to improve or risk meeting the same fate. But Helike isn't the only possible candidate for the real Atlantis. There are several other places that fit Plato's description, such as the island of Thera, now known as Santorini, which was destroyed by a volcanic eruption around 1600 BC. However, none of them match the story as closely as Helike does. After Marinados made his discovery in 1926, archaeologists returned to the Gulf of Corinth every year to uncover more about the lost city. They discovered the skeletons of residents who died during the final days of Helike, including a woman and child who were embracing when the water began to rise. The skeleton of a young man was found nearby with wounds on his head, suggesting that he was killed by a rock or piece of debris during the disaster. But perhaps the most fascinating find was the city's harbor, which contained dozens of ancient shipwrecks. Some of these were pulled to the surface using cranes while others were too big to move. Researchers estimated that the harbor had been bustling just before the city's destruction, as evidenced by the ships that were docked there. But what led to the demise of Helike? According to geologist Heracles Favis, rising sea levels caused by global warming could be to blame. He believes that increased precipitation and higher water levels destabilized the soil, causing the earthquakes that ultimately led to the flooding. But not everyone agrees with this assessment. Geologist Kostas Repapis claims that the flooding was caused by tectonic activity. The region is situated on a convergent plate boundary where the African and Eurasian plates meet. The African plate is slowly sliding beneath the Eurasian plate, creating a lot of pressure. When this pressure is released, it causes the seafloor to rise or fall, leading to earthquakes. Eventually, the force will be great enough to cause the entire region to collapse into a huge trench. Some researchers even believe that Helike could be a metaphor for the entire region of the Peloponnese, rather than a literal city. They argue that the earthquakes were so violent they caused the entire peninsula to sink. However, if this were true, we should have found evidence of the missing landmass by now. And we haven't. One theory suggests that the Peloponnese was once connected to the rest of Greece, forming a single landmass. Over time, earthquakes and rising sea levels caused the region to sink, eventually separating it from the mainland. Perhaps one day we'll discover physical proof that will allow us to solve this mystery once and for all. But for now, we can marvel at the incredible story of Helike and the fascinating discoveries that continue to be made there. Who knows what other secrets lie beneath the waves waiting to be uncovered? What do you think? Was Plato describing a real historical event, or was Atlantis just a figment of his imagination? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The builders of Petra. In present-day Jordan, nestled between the Red Sea and the vast expanse of the Syrian desert lies the lost city of Petra. This awe-inspiring site was built by an enigmatic civilization known as the Nabateans. But who were the Nabateans and where did they go? The Nabatean civilization thrived from the 4th century BCE until the 2nd century CE, leaving behind a legacy that continues to baffle and amaze us today. They carved their homes into sandstone cliffs and created a thriving metropolis complete with sophisticated water management systems, ingenious architecture, and an intriguing culture. Their most famous creation, Petra, is a testament to their skill and ingenuity. The city is a series of elaborate tombs, temples, and buildings intricately carved into the sheer rock face of a narrow gorge. Among these structures, the treasury stands out as the epitome of Nabatean craftsmanship. Its Corinthian columns and majestic facade make it one of the most iconic structures in the ancient world. But the Nabateans didn't just excel at stonework. They also developed advanced irrigation systems to channel water from distant sources into the city. These systems included a complex network of canals, dams, and cisterns that allowed them to grow crops in the arid desert environment. Their mastery over hydraulic engineering enabled them to transform the desert landscape and create fertile gardens amidst the sand dunes. Another remarkable aspect of the Nabatean civilization is their adoption of a unique script. While the exact origins of their script remain uncertain, it's believed to have been influenced by various ancient scripts, including those of the Arameans, Assyrians, and Egyptians. This alphabetic script served as a vital tool for communication, trade, and record-keeping, allowing the Nabateans to interact with other civilizations and maintain detailed records of their activities. The Nabateans weren't just masters of engineering and writing. They were also skilled traders and merchants. Located at the crossroads of several important trade routes, Petra became a hub for the exchange of goods such as spices, incense, and precious stones. The Nabateans leveraged their strategic location and developed into a wealthy and prosperous society through their control of trade networks. As the Nabatean civilization flourished, it attracted the attention of neighboring empires, including the Roman Empire. Over time, the Nabateans became incorporated into the Roman system, and Petra's role as a trading center diminished. However, the Nabatean identity and culture continued to persist, leaving an enduring legacy on the region. The mysterious disappearance of the Nabateans remains an enduring enigma that has captivated the curiosity of historians and archaeologists alike. As researchers continue to delve into the depths of this captivating mystery, new discoveries are shedding light on the fate of this once thriving civilization. Several theories attempt to explain what happened to the Nabateans, each offering a unique perspective on their sudden disappearance from historical records. One prevalent theory suggests that the Nabateans didn't vanish entirely, but rather assimilated into neighboring populations, gradually losing their distinct cultural identity over time. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that the Nabateans adopted cultural elements from surrounding civilizations, such as the Aramaic language, and that their disappearance coincides with the rise of other nomadic groups in the region. It's theorized that as the Nabatean society integrated with these external influences, their unique cultural traits were absorbed into the broader population, leading to their eventual assimilation. However, another compelling theory proposes that the Nabateans were tragically wiped out by a series of devastating events. This theory posits that a combination of factors, including climate change, natural disasters, and external conflicts, led to the destruction of the Nabatean civilization. Evidence supporting this theory includes archaeological findings such as abandoned settlements and ruined structures that suggest a sudden and violent upheaval. Additionally, historical accounts from neighboring regions mention wars and ecological shifts that align with the timeline of the Nabatean decline, suggesting that these external forces may have played a role in their disappearance. It's possible that both theories have some truth to them. Perhaps some Nabateans did assimilate while others were wiped out by external forces. The exact fate of the Nabateans remains a subject of ongoing research and debate among experts, and new discoveries may shed further light on their ultimate destiny. Number 8. Where did they go? The sudden disappearance of the Nabateans from historical records around the 2nd century CE has left scholars puzzled, trying to piece together what might have caused their abrupt disappearance. Some theories suggest that the Nabateans assimilated into neighboring populations, gradually fading away from history. However, others propose that they were tragically wiped out by a combination of climate change, natural disasters, and external conflicts. One contributing factor to their disappearance may have been the changing trade dynamics in the region. As the Roman Empire expanded its influence, new trade routes and centers emerged, potentially diverting trade away from Petra and weakening the Nabatean economy. Furthermore, internal strife and power struggles within the Nabatean kingdom could have destabilized the region, making it vulnerable to external threats. Climate change also played a significant role in the fate of the Nabateans. The region's delicate balance of trade and rainfall patterns shifted, impacting the availability of resources and agricultural production. Droughts and water scarcity could have strained their water harvesting systems, leading to ecological degradation and societal decline. External conflicts and the ambitions of neighboring empires also contributed to the Nabatean disappearance. The Roman Empire's growing influence and the ambitions of the Kingdom of Aksum posed significant challenges to Nabatean independence and security. The Nabateans were ultimately incorporated into the Roman province of Arabia, marking the end of their kingdom. To unravel the mysteries surrounding the disappearance of the Nabateans, ongoing research delves into various aspects of their civilization. Archaeologists continue to excavate sites like Petra, uncovering new insights into their daily life, economy, and interactions with other cultures. By examining trade networks, analyzing environmental changes, and studying the impact of external conflicts, scholars aim to reconstruct the events that led to the decline of this enigmatic civilization. Number 7. Water harvesting in the desert. In the heart of the arid Arabian Peninsula, where the sun blazes relentlessly and water is scarce, lies the lost city of Petra. Yet amidst this harsh desert environment, the Nabateans thrived for centuries. How did they conquer the challenges of the unforgiving terrain and sustain life in such an inhospitable climate? The answer lies in their ingenious methods of water harvesting and storage. The Nabateans possessed an advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering and implemented a series of innovative techniques to capture and store water from the surrounding hillsides. They constructed canals and channels that directed rainwater away from the rocky terrain and into a network of dams and cisterns. These structures were strategically placed across the landscape, ensuring that every drop of precious water was collected and redirected to areas where it was needed. One of their most remarkable feats was the construction of a series of dams that channeled water from the mountains into the heart of Petra. These dams were not only functional, but also blended seamlessly with the natural environment. The Nabateans realized that in such a dry climate, water was not just a necessity for survival, but a valuable resource that needed to be conserved and managed efficiently. They understood the importance of directing water away from the rocky surfaces of Petra, which offered little in the way of absorption, and towards the surrounding hillsides where it could percolate into the ground. This practice allowed them to replenish underground aquifers, creating a reservoir of groundwater that could be accessed during times of need. In addition to their water harvesting systems, the Nabateans also developed sophisticated irrigation techniques. They constructed a network of canals and ditches that distributed water from the stored sources to the fields and gardens throughout the city. By controlling the flow of water, they were able to cultivate crops and create lush vegetation even in the midst of the desert. Furthermore, the Nabateans built hundreds of rock-cut tombs and houses into the sandstone cliffs of the Sikh, a narrow gorge that leads to the treasury at Petra. This practice not only served as a form of burial, but also provided shelter and protection for the living. The tombs were often decorated with intricate carvings and served as a testament to the Nabatean belief in an afterlife. The Nabatean civilization serves as a remarkable example of how human ingenuity can triumph over the challenges of the natural environment. Their water harvesting and storage methods allowed them to thrive in the heart of the desert, showcasing their deep understanding of hydraulic engineering and ecological balance. As we continue to explore the secrets of Petra, the lost city of the Nabateans, each discovery adds another layer of wonder to this enigmatic civilization. From their magnificent rock-cut architecture to their ingenious water harvesting systems, the Nabateans have left behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe and amazement. Over 200 years ago, during the Age of Exploration, European adventurers ventured into the heart of Africa, bringing back tales of mysterious ruins hidden in the vast Kalahari Desert. These intrepid explorers, armed with little more than their wits and a thirst for discovery, stumbled upon what they believed to be evidence of a lost civilization. Hello, I'm Sarah, and I'm on a quest to uncover the most enigmatic mysteries of our planet. And one of those mysteries lies buried beneath the sands of the Kalahari Desert. As someone who has spent more nights than I care to admit poring over dusty explorer journals and grainy satellite images, I think I'm qualified to take you on this journey into the heart of Africa's greatest archaeological puzzle. You know, when I first heard about the lost civilization of the Kalahari, I couldn't help but think of all those adventure movies where intrepid archaeologists stumble upon ancient cities hidden in the jungle. But this isn't the jungle. It's a desert. And not just any desert, but one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. I mean, imagine trying to build a thriving civilization in a place where your morning coffee might be interrupted by a sandstorm. Not exactly prime real estate, right? But here's the thing. According to those early European explorers, that's exactly what happened. They claim to have found evidence of a sophisticated society right in the middle of this barren landscape. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sarah, are you telling me there was a Las Vegas of the ancient world smack dab in the Kalahari? Well, not exactly, but the reports were pretty mind-blowing. Let's dive into what these explorers actually saw. Or, at least, what they said they saw. Because, let's face it, after weeks of trudging through the desert, even an oddly shaped rock might start to look like the Taj Mahal. But these weren't just vague descriptions of big rocks or funny-looking hills. No, these explorers were talking about honest-to-goodness ruins. They described vast stone structures, intricately carved pillars, and even what appeared to be the remains of an advanced irrigation system. Now, remember, this is in a place where water is about as common as a penguin in the Sahara. So an irrigation system? That's like finding a subway map in a medieval castle. It just doesn't add up. One explorer, let's call him John, because, let's face it, half of these Victorian-era explorers seem to be named John, wrote about stumbling upon a series of concentric stone circles that stretched for miles. He likened it to a desert Stonehenge, only bigger and, in his words, far more perplexing. Now, I don't know about you, but I find regular Stonehenge perplexing enough. A supersized version in the middle of the desert? That's enough to make my brain do somersaults. Another explorer, we'll call her Elizabeth, because not all Victorian explorers were men, thank you very much, reported finding what she believed to be the remains of a grand palace. She described ornate carvings depicting scenes of daily life, including what appeared to be people farming and herding animals. In the Kalahari, let that sink in for a moment. Farming, in one of the driest places on Earth. It's like finding evidence of ice fishing in the Sahara. But here's where it gets really interesting. These explorers didn't just see buildings and structures. They also reported finding artifacts. We're talking pottery shards, metal tools, and even jewelry. One particularly lucky, or imaginative, explorer claimed to have found a golden statuette of a figure half human, half animal. Now, I'm not saying it was aliens, but, some people might. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sarah, this all sounds amazing. But could there really have been an advanced civilization in the middle of the desert? Well, my friends, that's the million-dollar question. And it's one that's been driving archaeologists, historians, and conspiracy theorists wild for the past 2 centuries. On the face of it, the idea seems absurd. The Kalahari Desert is one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. It's a place where temperatures can soar to over 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and plummet below freezing at night. Water is scarce, vegetation is sparse, and the soil is about as fertile as a parking lot. Not exactly prime real estate for building a thriving civilization, right? But here's the thing. Deserts haven't always been deserts. Climate change isn't just a modern phenomenon. Over thousands of years, areas that were once lush and fertile can become arid wastelands. Just look at the Sahara. Around 5,000 years ago, it was a verdant savanna teeming with life. So, is it possible that the Kalahari was once a more hospitable place? Some researchers think so. They point to evidence of ancient lake beds and river systems that have long since dried up. They argue that there could have been a window of opportunity, a sweet spot in time when the Kalahari was green enough to support a large population. And let's not forget, humans are remarkably adaptable. We've built cities in the Arctic, in the middle of rainforests, and even on top of mountains. Is it really so far-fetched to think we could have done the same in what is now a desert? Then there's the question of resources. Building a civilization requires more than just water and food. You need raw materials for construction, for tools, for art. And believe it or not, the Kalahari isn't entirely devoid of resources. There are deposits of copper, iron, and even gold in the region. So, theoretically, an ancient civilization could have had access to the materials needed to build those grand structures the explorers described. But here's where it gets really wild. Some researchers have proposed that this lost civilization wasn't just advanced for its time. It might have been more advanced than we are now. They point to those descriptions of vast irrigation systems and argue that this ancient society must have had an understanding of hydraulics and engineering that would rival our own. Others go even further, suggesting that this lost civilization might have had access to technologies we can't even comprehend. They point to those strange half-human, half-animal statues and wonder if they might represent some kind of genetic engineering. I know, it sounds like the plot of a sci-fi movie. But hey, truth is often stranger than fiction, right? Of course, not everyone is convinced. Skeptics argue that the whole thing is nothing more than a grand hoax, a tale spun by attention-seeking explorers, or maybe just a series of misunderstandings and exaggerations. After all, when you're tired, thirsty, and hallucinating from heat exhaustion, it's easy to mistake a pile of rocks for an ancient temple. And that brings us to the biggest problem with the lost civilization of the Kalahari, the lack of hard evidence. Because here's the kicker. Despite all these tantalizing reports from early explorers, modern archaeologists have found, well, not much. Now, before you start yelling cover up or conspiracy, let's think about this logically. The Kalahari Desert is big, really big. We're talking about an area of over 350,000 square miles. That's roughly the size of Germany and France combined. And unlike those countries, the Kalahari doesn't have convenient road signs pointing to ancient ruins 5 miles ahead. So, it's entirely possible that these ruins are out there, just waiting to be rediscovered. Maybe they're buried under centuries of sand. Maybe they're hidden in some remote corner of the desert that hasn't been thoroughly explored yet. Or maybe, just maybe, they never existed in the first place. But here's the thing. Even if we never find a single stone from this lost civilization, the mystery itself is fascinating. It tells us something about human nature, about our desire to believe in lost golden ages and hidden wonders. It speaks to our love of a good mystery and our hope that there's always something new to discover, even in a world that sometimes feels like it's been mapped down to the last pebble. And who knows, maybe tomorrow, some intrepid explorer or lucky satellite image analyst will stumble upon the ruins of a vast desert city. Maybe we'll find evidence of advanced technologies that will rewrite our understanding of human history. Or maybe we'll just find more sand. But isn't the possibility of discovery what makes archaeology so exciting? That's why I love diving into mysteries like this. They remind us that the world is still full of wonders, that there are still questions to be answered and secrets to be uncovered. They challenge us to look at the world with fresh eyes and an open mind. So what do you think? Was there really a lost civilization in the Kalahari Desert? Or is it all just a mirage, a story we tell ourselves to make the world seem a little more magical? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Who knows what lost world we might explore next? Until then, keep your eyes open and your mind curious. Because you never know, the next great archaeological discovery might be right under your feet. Or, buried under a few million tons of sand. Who built the largest city in the history of North America? What was life like inside this massive metropolis? And why did their empire crumble before the Europeans ever arrived? Hi, everyone. Cahokia is one of the most impressive archaeological sites in North America, and many have called it America's Teotihuacan, or even the North American equivalent of Egypt. But who were the builders of this great city? Why did they build giant pyramids? And what caused their civilization to collapse? Before we had cities like Boston, New York, and Los Angeles, there was a flourishing civilization in the Mississippi Valley that built an empire bigger than any other in pre-Columbian America. The story of this forgotten empire is much older than the commonly held belief that civilizations only began to flourish in the Americas after European colonization. This is a tale of a culture whose influence stretched from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf of Mexico, encompassing parts of 7 American states. In fact, the city of Cahokia alone covered an area of 6 square miles, which is around 16 times larger than the area of the ancient Egyptian capital of Memphis. In the peak of their civilization, the Mississippians had more than 20,000 people living within the borders of Cahokia, making it the largest city north of the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. So who were the Mississippians? Despite all their advancements, almost nothing is known about the origins of the Mississippian culture because they left behind no written records. Archaeologists believe they emerged around the year 1000 AD after migrating from the northeast. They spoke a language isolate, meaning it had no linguistic relatives and had no writing system either. So all we know about them comes from the archaeological record. The Mississippians are named after the river they lived beside, the Mississippi River, where their culture flourished between about 800 and 1600 AD. But their territory wasn't just around the Mississippi. It also included the nearby Missouri and Illinois rivers. The Mississippian culture is actually considered to be part of a larger cultural tradition called the Eastern Woodlands, which includes other cultures such as the Hopewell and the Woodland. The Mississippian culture is generally considered to be the successor of the Hopewell culture, which thrived during the first millennium AD. The Mississippians borrowed many of the Hopewell's burial customs, as well as some of their art motifs and religious beliefs. But unlike the Hopewell, the Mississippians lived in large settlements and built monumental architecture. Their biggest city, Cahokia, was located near present-day East St. Louis, Illinois. At its peak, Cahokia was home to more than 20,000 people. The city was laid out in a grid pattern with straight streets and well-defined neighborhoods. It was also home to several large plazas, including one of the largest in the ancient world. Another thing that set the Mississippians apart from their neighbors was their economy. Unlike the other Native American cultures of the time, the Mississippians didn't rely on hunting and gathering for food. Instead, they grew crops like corn, beans, and squash. They also had a complex system of trade that extended throughout North America. In fact, archaeologists have found Mississippian artifacts as far away as the Pacific Ocean. One of the most iconic features of Cahokia are the mounds that dot the landscape. There are more than 100 mounds at the site, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Some are small and round, while others are large and flat-topped. The largest mound, called Monk's Mound, rises 100 feet above the surrounding ground and covers 14 acres. That makes it the largest earthen construction in North America and the third largest in the world, right after the Great Wall of China and the pyramids of Cholula. What's interesting about Monk's Mound is that it wasn't built in a day. Instead, it was constructed over several centuries in a process known as accretion. As each new layer of soil was put in place, it was tamped down and smoothed out so that the mound would be nice and level. This is evidenced by the fact that the different layers of soil are visible on the surface of the mound. While many people call them pyramids, technically speaking, they aren't. To be classified as a pyramid, the structure must have a smooth sloping side and a flat top. However, the Mississippian mounds have flat sides and a rounded top, so they are more accurately called platform mounds. These mounds served a variety of purposes, both practical and ceremonial. Some were used as burial grounds, while others may have been used for ritualistic purposes. Still others may have been the foundations for temples or other important buildings. In fact, the Mississippians had a very complex religion that involved a number of different deities. The main deity was called the Great Spirit, and he was responsible for creating the world. The Great Spirit was often depicted as a bird, and there are many artifacts depicting birds that have been found at Mississippian sites. Another important deity was the sun god, who was responsible for the seasons and the weather. The sun god was often depicted as a warrior, and there are many depictions of warfare and battles in Mississippian art. It's believed that the Mississippians kept slaves, too. This is evidenced by the fact that some skeletons have been found with unusual injuries, such as broken bones and skulls with wounds from blows. These individuals were likely captured in warfare and sold into slavery. Slavery was widespread in the ancient world, and it's not surprising that the Mississippians participated in it. Now, let's talk about why their civilization collapsed. One theory is that the Mississippians were victims of climate change. Around the year 1200, the climate in North America began to cool and dry out. This made it difficult to grow crops, which led to famine and warfare. Another theory is that the Mississippians were wiped out by disease. When the Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought with them diseases that devastated Native American populations. It's possible that a similar thing happened when the Mississippians were at their peak. Perhaps they were infected by a disease that came from Asia via the Silk Roads. There's also evidence that the Mississippians were hit by a catastrophic flood, which may have contributed to their downfall. Whatever the cause, the Mississippian civilization was gone by the 1600s. The people either died out or assimilated with other Native American cultures. Today, there are only a few thousand Mississippians alive, mostly living in Oklahoma and Kansas. One of the things that makes the Mississippians so fascinating is that they were clearly a highly sophisticated civilization. They had a complex religion, a large city, and a thriving economy. Yet today we know very little about them because they left behind no written records. All we have are the archaeological remains of their cities and artifacts. Despite the fact that they were gone long before the Europeans arrived, the Mississippians had a profound impact on the history of North America. Their culture flourished in what is now the Midwest, and their influence can still be seen in the art, religion, and customs of Native American tribes today. What do you think? Were the Mississippians simply a victim of circumstance, or was there more to their disappearance? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. Chaco Canyon is one of the most mysterious places in North America. It was once home to a thriving civilization that built great houses, roads, and other structures which continue to baffle scientists today. But then one day the entire population mysteriously vanished. No trace of them remains except the ruins of their great buildings. What happened to them? In this video, we will take a closer look at the Chaco Canyon and the strange things that happened here. Be sure to watch until the end to find out what may have really happened to its inhabitants. And stick around till the end to find out what secrets the Chaco Canyon is hiding. The American Southwest is full of archaeological sites from ancient civilizations. The problem is that these sites are usually pretty small. Most of the time we read talking about a few broken pottery shards or some old petroglyphs carved into a rock monolith. Once in a while, however, archaeologists uncover something much larger. This happened in 1927 when excavations revealed a huge settlement in the Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. The site was named Pueblo Bonito, which means beautiful town in Spanish. It was originally constructed around 850 AD and served as the ceremonial and administrative center of an entire region. At its peak, the city covered over 40 acres and housed between 2,000 and 3,500 residents. Archaeologists believe that the city was abandoned sometime after 1250 AD. However, this is just a theory. In reality, nobody knows why the city was abandoned. It's now known as Chaco Canyon, and all that's left of it is a jumble of ancient stone buildings and great roads leading into the desert. Nobody is quite sure who built this place. We know they were Native Americans because artifacts found here prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. But before we get too deep into that, let's take a moment to explain how these amazing structures were made. Chaco Canyon was built by the ancestral Puebloans. This term refers to several different Native American tribes that lived in the Four Corners region, which is where Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona meet. These people are also known as the Anasazi, but many people dislike this name because it means enemy or bloodsucker in Navajo. If you're watching this video in the future, the term ancestral Puebloan is the preferred term for all historians and archaeologists. The ancestral Puebloans were very advanced for their time. They constructed multi-story apartment complexes made from stone, like the ones you can still see today at Chaco Canyon. They learned how to make pottery from local clay deposits and even developed their own unique style of weaving. Although they had no metal tools, they used grinding rocks to make everything from corn flour to paint pigments. The ancestral Puebloans were also highly skilled astronomers who kept track of constellations and planetary positions. It's believed that they followed the movements of celestial bodies to keep their calendar. But who were these people and where did they come from? Unfortunately, nobody knows for sure. All we know comes from the scant archaeological evidence left behind. What we do know is that the ancestral Puebloans arrived in the Chaco Canyon sometime in the 7th century. They slowly grew their settlement over the next 2 centuries until it became the cultural and spiritual capital of the Southwest. But then something strange happened. Over the next few decades, the ancestral Puebloans began building giant roads across the desert. These roads led to nowhere in particular and seemed to be built just for the sake of being built. One of the strangest things about these roads is that they were perfectly straight. Some of them were also surprisingly wide, measuring up to 30 feet across. That's wider than most modern roads. To make matters even stranger, these roads don't appear to have been used for any sort of transportation. Archaeologists found no traces of animal bones along the roads, which would indicate that wagons or pack animals had traveled along them. Furthermore, there's no signs of wear and tear. If these roads were used for walking, we should expect to see signs of erosion or depression in the center where people walked. But there's none of that either. So why were these roads built? Nobody knows. But some researchers speculate that they were used for religious ceremonies or processions. Others say they were used for trade or defense. But these are only guesses. There's absolutely no way to tell why such large roads were built only to be never used. Another strange thing about Chaco Canyon is that it has many strange alignments with certain stars. The main structure of Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito, aligns with the Milky Way. When viewed from atop a nearby hill, the layout of the rooms matches the shape of the constellation Orion. This is not a coincidence. The ancestral Puebloans were avid sky watchers and deliberately placed the walls of their city to match certain stars. But why? Nobody knows. It is theorized that the ancestral Puebloans built their cities to mirror the cosmos as a way of understanding the universe. They may have believed that the stars had a direct influence on their lives. Or perhaps they simply saw the patterns in the sky and decided to incorporate them into their architecture. Whatever the reason, the Chaco Canyon has more star alignments than any other ancient site in North America. But what really makes Chaco Canyon so mysterious is the fact that it was suddenly abandoned. Just imagine you're living in the Chaco Canyon in the year 1250 AD. For generations, your people have thrived here. You live in a bustling city with plenty of food and resources. Then, without warning, everything changes. Crops fail, the rains stop, and the river dries up. Your once great city becomes a ghost town. You're forced to leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. This scenario may sound familiar to anyone who has lived through a drought. But this isn't just some story from the Old Testament. It actually happened right here in the Chaco Canyon. Around 1250 AD, the entire region experienced a massive drought that lasted for nearly 20 years. Temperatures rose well above normal and rainfall fell to record lows. The Rio Chaco, which flowed through the canyon, dried up completely. The ancestral Puebloans tried their best to survive. They may have migrated to other regions or tried to build new settlements. But after 2 decades of no rain, they had little choice but to abandon their homes and wander into the desert. There is only one problem with this theory. A 2008 study showed that the drought wasn't as severe as previously thought. Yes, temperatures were warmer and rainfall was lower than average, but it wasn't a total game changer. Other areas in the Southwest experienced similar conditions, and yet nobody left their homes. Only the ancestral Puebloans mysteriously vanished from Chaco Canyon. So if the drought didn't force them to leave, what did? Some researchers say that the ancestral Puebloans were wiped out by an invading tribe. Maybe the Hopi people migrated into the Chaco Canyon and killed everyone who lived there. But there's no archaeological evidence to support this theory. There's no mass graves or signs of a battle. Besides, the Hopi people weren't even in the picture until about 1500 AD. By this point, the Chaco Canyon had already been abandoned for 250 years. Others believe that the ancestral Puebloans simply died out. Perhaps disease, famine, or war caused their population to decline. Eventually, there were so few people left that they had no choice but to scatter into the desert. Again, there's no evidence to support this theory. The truth is that nobody knows what happened to the ancestral Puebloans. Their entire civilization seems to have vanished into thin air. This is what makes Chaco Canyon so mysterious. The ruins of their great buildings are still standing, but there's no trace of the people who built them. Chaco Canyon is located in northwest New Mexico. Today, it's protected as a National Historical Park. Visitors from around the world come to marvel at the ancient ruins and learn about the ancestral Puebloans. The park is open year-round and offers a variety of activities, including hiking, camping, and fishing. If you ever visit Chaco Canyon, be sure to bring plenty of water and sunscreen. It can get very hot and dry in the desert. Also, be respectful of the ancient ruins and don't touch anything while you're there. You never know what kind of artifacts you might stumble upon. Who knows? You could even discover the next piece of the puzzle that helps us understand what happened to the ancestral Puebloans. Until then, we may never know what happened to them. Their great civilization may have been one of the most advanced in the ancient world, but ultimately it was undone by the forces of nature. Or maybe something more sinister lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike when the time was right. Satellite images reveal the shocking truth about the Amazon rainforest. Beneath this seemingly endless green abyss lie the secrets of a lost civilization that could rewrite history. Hi, it's me, Number 4, A City Underneath the Trees. According to researchers at the University of California, satellite images show clear evidence of something gigantic lying underneath the Amazon rainforest. But it isn't some undiscovered species of wildlife or an unknown tribe hiding from the outside world. Instead, there is proof of a massive structure buried under the jungle. This discovery has led experts to speculate that the Amazon rainforest could be hiding the remnants of a large-scale civilization that was here thousands of years ago. But how can anyone be sure? Well, according to Professor Emeritus Paul Jetline of the University of Chicago, this isn't some sort of modern-day conspiracy theory. The evidence of these gigantic structures has been right under our noses the entire time. It just took someone with the right expertise to uncover it. By analyzing aerial photographs taken of the Amazon in the 1970s, Paul noticed what appeared to be geometric shapes hidden within the jungle. And while they may not look like much on paper, when compared with other satellite images taken years later, a clear change is visible. What once looked like random, shapeless patches of cleared land were clearly man-made structures. Only now, they were completely covered over by thick foliage. But what are these strange shapes? And more importantly, what happened to whoever built them? Well, before we answer that question, let's take a closer look at how these mysterious ruins were discovered in the first place. You see, back in 2019, scientists used LiDAR scanning technology to peer beneath the thick canopy of the Amazon rainforest. This non-invasive technology uses lasers to measure distances to create high-resolution maps of terrain. In other words, it acts like an all-seeing eye, allowing scientists to get a glimpse of what lies beneath the dense vegetation without causing any damage themselves. When used in conjunction with aerial photography, light radar can create incredibly detailed images of remote areas of the rainforest that would otherwise be impossible to access. Using this technology, researchers from the Woods Hole Research Center in Massachusetts discovered shocking evidence of human activity in the remote area of the Amazon. They found hundreds of square miles of flat land that had been artificially created. Each of these flat areas had been made by cutting down trees and moving the debris to the surrounding areas. This process of deforestation reveals the incredible engineering skills these ancient builders must have possessed. And it shows us that the Amazon rainforest has been inhabited by humans for far longer than previously thought possible. So who were the people who built these strange structures, and where did they go? Well, number 3, the Europeans brought a terrible disease. As mentioned earlier, it's difficult to believe that the Amazon rainforest was ever home to a large-scale civilization. After all, the area is so remote that no one could possibly have lived there, right? Wrong. Archaeologists have known for quite some time now that the area around the Andes Mountains was once inhabited by a thriving culture that boasted large settlements, impressive temples, and highly skilled craftsmanship. But what about the rest of the Amazon rainforest? Surely no one could have survived out there, right? Well, surprisingly, that may not be true either. While the majority of the population lived along the Andes, small groups of people spread out across the Amazonian basin. These groups likely numbered in the hundreds, and they relied on the abundant natural resources to survive. With enough food, clean water, and raw materials at their disposal, these small communities thrived and grew into large villages. However, their way of life came crashing down around them when the Europeans arrived in South America in the 16th century. Diseases brought over from Europe, such as smallpox and measles, devastated the native populations. Since these diseases were new to the Americas, there was nothing in the local plants or animals that could fight against them. And as a result, millions of natives died within just a few decades. Those who survived the epidemics often succumbed to harsh treatment at the hands of the conquistadors. By the end of the 16th century, many of these native tribes had been completely wiped out. What makes this theory even more plausible is the fact that diseases brought over from Europe were primarily airborne. This means that anyone who contracted the disease most likely died within weeks, but their homes remained intact. Evidence of this can be seen all throughout South America, including deep within the Amazon rainforest. As mentioned earlier, light radar technology has allowed scientists to see through the dense foliage of the Amazon. What they have found is nothing short of incredible. There are hundreds of lost settlements hidden deep within the rainforest, each one boasting unique geometric shapes and designs. Some of these structures are only a few feet tall, while others stand several stories high. All of them are incredibly well preserved, which makes it all the more likely that they were abandoned in a hurry. Number 2. Hidden under the foliage. One of the most exciting discoveries made by scientists using LiDAR technology is a series of perfectly straight lines running through the Amazon rainforest. These lines are not only straight, but they are also spaced evenly apart. There are gaps between each line that are consistent throughout. This leads scientists to believe that these lines were created intentionally and that they may have been used for some kind of agriculture. In fact, the layout of these lines closely resembles that of ancient Roman roads, which were designed to connect major cities and military outposts. However, there is one key difference between the Roman roads and the lines in the Amazon. The spacing between each line is much wider, leading some experts to believe that these structures may have been used for something other than transportation. Instead, they may have been used as boundaries for farming or grazing land. This theory is supported by the fact that many of the lines converge on large flat areas, which could have been used for planting crops or raising livestock. But why would these early inhabitants of the Amazon need such large areas for farming and grazing? Well, it is likely that they had domesticated some of the local plants and animals and were raising them on a large scale. This would have required a lot of land, especially if they were trying to sustain a large population. Unfortunately, there is no evidence of domesticated animals or plants in the Amazon today, so we may never know for sure what these structures were used for. Number 1. An ancient highway. While the straight lines are certainly fascinating, there is another structure hidden within the Amazon rainforest that is truly remarkable. Using LiDAR technology, scientists were able to identify a giant causeway that is nearly 200 feet wide and stretches for miles through the jungle. This causeway is not only wide, but it is also straight and level, making it an ideal thoroughfare for large groups of people or animals. In fact, the causeway appears to be so well constructed that it could have been used for modern-day transportation. This is truly remarkable considering that it is located deep within the Amazon rainforest and was likely created thousands of years ago. But who would have used this ancient highway, and where did it lead? Well, unfortunately, scientists are still unsure of its purpose, but they believe it may have been used to connect different settlements across the rainforest. This theory is supported by the fact that the causeway appears to lead to other structures such as large mounds and platforms that could have housed important buildings or religious sites. It is possible that the ancient inhabitants of the Amazon used this causeway to travel to sacred sites for religious ceremonies or to visit other settlements for trade or communication. However, this is just a theory since there is no written record of the people who lived in the Amazon rainforest. We may never know for sure what this ancient highway was used for. Imagine for a moment that you are an archaeologist combing through thousands of years of debris looking for some trace evidence of one of history's most elusive artifacts, the Ark of the Covenant. You've been searching for months without any real success until suddenly your shovel hits something hard. Brushing away the dirt, you find a massive stone slab covered in strange symbols. As you translate the text, you realize that this is a huge treasure trove of information about one of the most powerful civilizations of ancient Africa, the Kingdom of Aksum. But who were the Aksumites and where did they go? Let's explore. The Kingdom of Aksum was one of the most powerful civilizations of ancient Africa. Located in what is today northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, its influence stretched across the Red Sea to the Middle East and into sub-Saharan Africa. At its peak, between the 1st and 7th century CE, the kingdom was home to around 2 million people and controlled important trade routes that connected the Roman Empire to the riches of the East. In the Bible, we first hear of the Kingdom of Aksum when it is mentioned in the story of the Queen of Sheba. She was the ruler of a wealthy kingdom in the south, possibly located in modern-day Yemen or Ethiopia. When she heard of King Solomon's wisdom, she went to Jerusalem to test his knowledge. Impressed by his answers, she returned home and gave birth to his son Menelik I, who would later establish the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia. According to tradition, the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Aksum by Menelik after he fled an attempt on his life by his brother, King Solomon. It is said to have been hidden in the Church of St. Mary of Zion in Aksum, where it remains to this day. This would make the Kingdom of Aksum one of the possible locations of the Ark of the Covenant. But the Kingdom of Aksum wasn't just significant because of its religious relics. Its strategic location on the trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to India and China made it incredibly wealthy. Traders from Arabia, Greece, Egypt and Rome came to Aksum to purchase ivory, gold, incense, and exotic animals. The city was also an important stop on the journey to Mecca, which drew Muslim traders and scholars to its cosmopolitan population. Perhaps even more impressive than its wealth was the Kingdom of Aksum's military power. By the 4th century, the army consisted of 80,000 infantry soldiers and 8,000 cavalry soldiers, making it one of the largest militaries in the ancient world. The kingdom's peak came under King Izana, who converted the kingdom to Christianity in 330 AD and expanded the empire southwards, conquering much of present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. His successors continued to push south, establishing trading posts as far away as the Indian Ocean. But despite its power and wealth, the kingdom of Aksum eventually fell into decline. In the mid-7th century, the Muslim conquests in Arabia cut off important trade routes and deprived Aksum of its economic lifeline. To make matters worse, a devastating drought in the 7th century led to famine and civil war. The once great empire was fragmented into smaller states and eventually vanished from world history. So why did such a powerful civilization just seemingly disappear? There are many theories. Some historians argue that the rise of Islam played a significant role in the decline of Aksum. As the new religion spread throughout the Arabian Peninsula, Muslim merchants began to dominate the trade routes that passed through the region. This may have led to tensions between the Christian kingdom of Aksum and the growing Muslim powers. For example, there are records of conflicts between the two groups over control of trading cities along the coast of modern-day Somalia. Additionally, the emergence of Islam may have contributed to the decline of long-distance trade, as some of the goods that were once highly sought after, such as incense and myrrh, became more available in Muslim-controlled areas. This could have had a negative impact on the economy of Aksum, which relied heavily on trade. Another theory suggests that the drought and famine that hit the region in the 7th century played a major role in the downfall of the kingdom of Aksum. The severe weather conditions likely led to food shortages, which in turn caused widespread suffering and instability. This could have weakened the central government and made it more vulnerable to internal and external threats. The drought may have also contributed to the civil wars that broke out during this time, as competition for resources intensified. Furthermore, the lack of rainfall likely had an impact on agricultural production, leading to a decline in the population and a weakening of the military. As the kingdom's resources dwindled, its ability to defend itself against outside invaders may have diminished, leaving it vulnerable to attacks from neighboring states. Another potential reason for the fall of Aksum is the rise of other regional powers. As the kingdom of Aksum was being weakened by internal and external pressures, other civilizations in the area began to grow in strength. For example, the kingdom of Kush, located in present-day Sudan, had been a rival of Aksum for centuries. As Aksum's power declined, Kush may have become more assertive in its territorial claims, posing a threat to the stability of the region. Additionally, the rise of the kingdom of Beja in the eastern part of modern-day Sudan and Eritrea could have also contributed to the decline of Aksum. As these neighboring states grew in power, they may have taken advantage of the internal conflicts and instability in Aksum to expand their own territories. The kingdom of Dhofar in modern-day southwestern Ethiopia and Eritrea was another potential contender. Over time, this kingdom gained prominence in the region and eventually replaced Aksum as a major power in the area. It is also possible that the fall of Aksum was due to a combination of all these factors rather than any single event. The kingdom of Aksum had been a dominant force in the region for centuries, controlling important trade routes and maintaining a powerful military. However, the rise of Islam, droughts, and the growth of rival regional powers ultimately led to its decline and eventual disappearance from world history. While little is known about the kingdom today, its legacy continues to be felt in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Many of its ancient sites and monuments are still standing, serving as reminders of its once great civilization. What if someone told you that there was an entire empire whose population surpassed 8 million people, and then one day they just disappeared? No trace of them left behind except for a few old structures scattered throughout the jungle. Welcome to my channel. Today we will explore how the Khmer Empire fell, starting with the builders of this structure, Angkor Wat. They were a once great empire who built the largest religious monument in the world. To put into perspective just how large it is, you can fit 30 American football fields inside of it. and the temple is still expanding today. That's because it was originally built as a Hindu temple dedicated to the god Vishnu. But over time, it became a Buddhist temple. And since Buddhism believes in reaching enlightenment through the cycle of death and rebirth, the construction never stopped. But what about before the construction of Angkor Wat? Where did this empire come from? Well, its origins can be traced back to the 9th century in the jungles of Cambodia. Legend has it that the Khmer Empire was founded by a man named Kambu Sudharman. He was out hunting one day when he came across a beautiful woman bathing in a lake. This woman was the daughter of the demon king of the netherworld. So when he asked her to marry him, she accepted, but only if he could build a city where the sun and the moon would touch at Mount Meru, the mythical center of the universe. With her help, he was able to find this exact location. Then, with the power granted to him by his wife, he built the first capital of the Khmer Empire, Angkor. Over the next 2 centuries, the empire grew quickly and eventually spread across much of the Indochina Peninsula. They were quite advanced for their time. For example, their hydraulic engineering was centuries ahead of its time. It was said that King Jayavarman II built reservoirs, canals, and dikes to water farmlands, and even predicted eclipses. Their society was also very egalitarian for the time period. Women were treated as equals to men, allowed to own property, and engage in commerce. Also, unlike many other empires, slavery was illegal within the Khmer Empire. But with such a vast territory to govern, maintaining peace was difficult. By the 12th century, rival states had begun attacking the borders of the Khmer Empire. This caused King Suryavarman II to focus less on hydraulic engineering and more on military might, resulting in a massive buildup of roads and military infrastructure. However, despite all of these advancements, there was always something missing from the empire. There was no unifying religion. While most followed Hinduism or Buddhism, others followed animism or even Islam. This lack of unity would ultimately lead to the downfall of the empire. But before we get into how exactly that happened, let me tell you about the peak of the Khmer Empire. By the 12th century, the empire had grown to its greatest extent, ruling over 8 million people. And during this time, it was one of the most prosperous places on earth. Trade routes stretched from China to India, bringing in merchants and pilgrims from across the continent. Cities buzzed with activity as merchants sold their wares and artisans crafted intricate works of art. But despite all of this prosperity, cracks were beginning to show within the empire. Farmers were revolting against high taxes. Soldiers were becoming increasingly restless. And religious leaders were constantly fighting each other for influence over the king. Then suddenly, after 600 years of continuous rule, King Jayavarman VII died without an heir, leaving the empire vulnerable. Outside forces took advantage of this instability, beginning to chip away at the empire's territory. But perhaps the greatest threat came from within. A civil war erupted between 2 rival factions, the Cham and the Khmer. The Cham were the ruling elite, while the Khmer were the commoners. As the fighting intensified, the cities were abandoned and the countryside was ravaged by warfare. This was around the same time that the first European explorers arrived in the area, but they found nothing but ruins. So how did the mighty Khmer Empire fall from grace so quickly? Well, there are several factors that contributed to their downfall. First and foremost was climate change. Between the 13th and 14th centuries, the monsoon season became increasingly dry. This led to crop failures and famine, which caused people to abandon their homes and flee to the cities. The cities couldn't support the influx of people, and eventually they were forced to expand into the countryside. This expansion led to increased warfare with neighboring states, which drained the empire's resources. And finally, as the environment continued to deteriorate, the soil became less fertile and production dropped even further. This created a vicious cycle that ultimately led to the empire's collapse. And yet somehow life still managed to flourish amidst the ruins. Vines crept up the sides of buildings and trees took root in the courtyards. Monkeys chattered in the branches and birds nested in the eaves. Despite the neglect, nature seemed determined to reclaim the city as its own. But who were the people living among the ruins? Where did they come from and how did they survive? The answer is that the people living in the ruins were the descendants of the original inhabitants of the city. After the Khmer Empire collapsed, Angkor was abandoned and the surrounding jungle grew. Over time, people began to move back into the area and rebuild their lives. They cleared away the underbrush, planted crops, and built new homes. They also began to explore the ruins, searching for materials to use in their new construction projects. Some of them even made their homes within the ruins themselves, carving out spaces in the thick walls and floors. Life was difficult, but they were resourceful and managed to make a living for themselves. These people were not only surviving, but thriving in spite of the challenges they faced. They developed a close relationship with the jungle that surrounded them, relying on it for food, medicine, and building materials. In turn, they respected the jungle and took only what they needed. This symbiotic relationship between the people and the jungle ensured that both would survive for generations to come. The jungle provided them with a home, and they, in turn, cared for the jungle. Today, the jungle is home to a variety of plant and animal species, many of which are endangered. The people have worked hard to protect the jungle and its inhabitants, and as a result, it is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. The story of these people is truly remarkable. They have managed to survive in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, and they have done so without destroying the environment. They are a testament to the human spirit of resilience and adaptability. Minoans, Europe's first great civilization, arose on the island of Crete around 2700 BC during the Bronze Age. They built sprawling palaces with over 1,000 rooms connected by a maze of corridors that resembled a labyrinth. So who were the builders of this labyrinth palace? And did their downfall have anything to do with a raging bull? Stay tuned to find out. Before we get into today's video, don't forget to subscribe for more videos about ancient archaeological finds. The first thing that comes to mind when hearing the name Minoans is the famous labyrinth. But where exactly is Knossos, and what was so special about it? Knossos Palace was built in the Bronze Age on the island of Crete, which today belongs to Greece. In ancient times, however, it belonged to the kingdom of Minos. This kingdom was named after its legendary king, King Minos. He ruled over not only the entire island of Crete, but also parts of the Peloponnese and several Cycladic islands. The Minoan civilization developed on Crete independently from other civilizations in the region. It reached its peak between 1700 and 1450 BC. During this period, it became a thriving trade center. Its ships sailed to distant Egypt and the coasts of modern Turkey and Syria. The Minoans traded with natural resources from their island, such as wine, oil, and textiles. Thanks to this flourishing trade, they amassed huge fortunes. This is evident in their architecture. The royal palaces of Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros were decorated with beautiful frescoes. These wall paintings depict everyday life, religious ceremonies, and hunting scenes. The Minoans loved decorating their walls with images of nature, especially plants and animals. For example, the famous octopus fresco shows how much the Minoans valued their natural environment. In this regard, their palaces weren't just places of government, but also served as a kind of open-air museum, reflecting the culture, art, and values of the Minoan civilization. What's particularly interesting is that Knossos was the largest of the four palaces. Over time, it attracted many people from all over the Aegean. The influx of people made the city even richer. The population would have grown exponentially. However, an estimated 30% of the buildings in Knossos were workshops. These were used to make all kinds of products. There were metal workshops where weapons and jewelry were made, as well as workshops for making pottery and textiles. Because of this diversity of shops and the large number of inhabitants who had to be fed, Knossos likely functioned like a giant hive. Everything was organized centrally. Just like a modern metropolis, the palace was surrounded by residential areas and farmlands. Since Crete was largely mountainous, most of the fields were located outside the city walls. The residents could grow cereals such as wheat, barley, and legumes. Olives and grapes grew on the slopes, while vineyards covered the lower areas. Animal husbandry also played an important role in the economy. Goats, sheep, and pigs were raised, while bees were kept in specially constructed beehives. However, the layout of Knossos was anything but orderly. Its design was very chaotic. This is mainly because the complex wasn't built all at once. Knossos had already been inhabited before the construction of the Great Palace. Originally, there was a small village here. This village was destroyed by an earthquake in 1800 BC. After that, King Minos decided to build a new palace on the site of the old village. When he died, his son, King Rhesus, continued expanding the palace. His successor, King Sarpedon, completed the construction of the labyrinth. You probably already know how the story goes. King Minos kidnapped the wife of the neighboring king, Queen Europe. He wanted to make her his own. As a gift of gratitude, the sea god Poseidon sent Europe a magnificent white bull. King Minos, however, didn't want such an animal roaming freely across his kingdom. Therefore, he decided to sacrifice the bull. But just as he was about to kill the animal, the bull suddenly vanished. It turned out that the sea god Poseidon was angry with King Minos for not keeping his promise. As punishment, the god let the king's daughter, Princess Ariadne, fall in love with the bull. In order to save his daughter from her hopeless love affair with the bull, King Minos built a huge labyrinth outside the city. He locked Princess Ariadne inside. No one was ever supposed to escape from this labyrinth. And so it came that the labyrinth housed a terrible monster, the Minotaur. Every 9 years, King Minos sacrificed 7 young men and women to the beast. So now you know why Knossos is known as the Palace of the Labyrinth. But how did this great palace burn down? And what does it have to do with the volcanic eruption of Santorini? The burning of Knossos has been one of the greatest mysteries of the Bronze Age for a long time. Scientists still argue about the true cause of the disaster. Some believe that the Minoans cut down too many trees. This caused heavy soil erosion, which in turn led to the downfall of the civilization. Others think that earthquakes or invaders were responsible for the fire. Today, however, we know that none of these theories are correct. A few years ago, archaeologists came across something incredible. They found charred pieces of wood in the ruins of Knossos. With modern technology, scientists were able to date these pieces of wood. It turned out that they were burned about 3,600 years ago. At that time, there was no sign of human activity in the area. In fact, the entire region had been abandoned. This finding suggests that the burning of Knossos wasn't caused by humans. Instead, it must have been a natural disaster. But what kind of disaster can completely wipe out an entire civilization? If you guessed a volcanic eruption, you'd be absolutely right. The Santorini volcanic eruption occurred about 3,600 years ago. Back then, the island was called Thera, and it looked completely different than it does today. It was significantly larger. In fact, it was almost twice the size of its current self. The island formed a triangle with the islands of Crete and the Peloponnese. Until the 17th century BC, Thera was an independent kingdom. However, from 1600 BC onwards, the Mycenaeans had subjugated the island. This group of people came from the Peloponnese and settled on Thera. The Mycenaeans remained on the island for about 250 years until their demise. On Thera, there was a settlement near the caldera that was home to about 5,000 people. Today, we know that these people were closely related to the Minoans. Many artifacts have been found that prove the close relationship between the two civilizations. So when the Mycenaeans were driven out of Thera, they likely fled to the neighboring island of Crete. They integrated into Minoan society and brought their knowledge with them. This may explain why the Minoan civilization flourished so much. But back to the volcanic eruption. What really happened on Thera? To answer this question, we have to go back 3,600 years. Back then, the island of Thera experienced a violent volcanic eruption. However, this event wasn't unique. In fact, the island has experienced 7 major eruptions in the past. The first occurred around 3000 BC, the second in 2100 BC, and the third in 1650 BC. The last one happened 700 years ago. The volcanic eruption in the 17th century BC changed the Mediterranean forever. It was one of the most powerful eruptions in history. The explosion had a catastrophic impact on climate change. The ash and dust from the eruption rose high into the atmosphere. There they blocked the sunlight. As a result, temperatures worldwide dropped by several degrees. It's believed that this event caused widespread crop failures. As if that wasn't enough, a tsunami rolled across the Mediterranean. The waves were up to 30 meters high. Entire cities along the coast were wiped off the map. On Crete, too, entire villages were destroyed by the waves. Scientists believe that around 20,000 people lost their lives that day. But there was another devastating side effect. Pyroclastic flows descended from the sky. These hot clouds raced down the slopes at a speed of up to 100 kilometers per hour. Everything in their path was burned to the ground. To get an idea of how violent this natural disaster was, just take a look at the settlements near the volcano. You won't find a single trace of them today. They were completely wiped off the map. It's believed that the Minoan civilization never fully recovered from this disaster. It's possible that the remaining Minoans simply fled to the mountains. Over the centuries, they later formed the basis for the Mycenaean civilization. However, this theory is still being debated by experts. One thing's for sure, though, the Santorini volcanic eruption marked the end of an era. The Bronze Age came to an abrupt end. The wheel of history turns inexorably forward. New cultures arise, but the achievements of the Minoans and the secrets of the labyrinth of Knossos live on in our memory. We have found some incredible underwater discoveries off the coast of Japan that may just rewrite history. We all know about the pyramids of Egypt, but what if there was a civilization even older that predates the Egyptian Empire? Hi, everyone. Here today we're going to look at the mystery of the Yonaguni Monument. The discovery of these ruins has shocked the world, and historians are still trying to come up with answers. But first, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already so that you don't miss any more of our fact-filled videos. Let's get into it. This mystery started back in 1938 when oceanographer Kihachiro Oshinston discovered a large flat structure submerged off the coast of Yonaguni Island, which is part of the Okinawa Prefecture in Japan. This discovery was quite a shock because it was thought that there couldn't possibly be any human-made structures underneath all that water. However, it turns out that he was onto something big. In 1986, Takashi Matsui, a marine archaeologist, went out into the ocean to investigate these supposed ruins, and he found a few huge stone blocks that were not naturally occurring. These stones had been carved by human hands, and they had been placed precisely to make a structure. These findings were so compelling that a team of Japanese researchers went back to Yonaguni Island again in 2002 and used sonar imaging technology to see under the seabed. What they found really changed everything. Using high-tech tools such as side-scan sonar and sub-bottom profilers, they were able to discover that there were many artificially made structures in the shape of stairs leading down into the ocean. There were also other geometric shapes that suggested that this wasn't a natural formation. All signs were pointing towards one thing. This was the site of a lost ancient civilization. But how long ago did this civilization live? Carbon dating of the artifacts and samples from the site suggest that this place was inhabited over 10,000 years ago, making it much older than Egypt. At the time of its existence, sea levels were significantly lower, meaning that the landmass which would later become submerged was actually accessible to humans. There are several interesting features of the Yonaguni Monument, and we'll go through them now. You may find some of them to be very convincing proof that humans lived here a very long time ago. A vast array of artifacts have been found at the site. People have uncovered stone tools, pottery, and animal bones that indicate humans lived here as far back as 40,000 years ago. And here's where things get a little bit weird. None of these artifacts resemble any of the tools or pottery made by the indigenous people of Japan. They simply don't match up. This suggests that these artifacts may have belonged to a completely different culture that we have yet to identify. Maybe they were from a civilization that existed before the Jomon period of prehistory in Japan. And it gets even weirder because many of these artifacts resemble the type of tools and pottery that would have been made thousands of years later in South America. If that's true, then why were ancient people from the Americas in Japan 10,000 years ago? And what happened to them? Another strange thing about the Yonaguni Monument is that the stairs that lead down from the land into the ocean are very precise, and they are geometric. It seems obvious that these stairs are artificial and were most likely created by ancient architects who planned out the structure very carefully. But who were they? Who built this place and why? Researchers believe that Yonaguni may have been used as a ritualistic site. There is evidence that it once played a central role in religious ceremonies. Scientists also believe that the monument could have been a burial ground, as many skeletons have been found nearby. And finally, another interesting feature about the Yonaguni Monument is that it has been dated back to the last ice age, when humans and wild animals roamed across the land bridge that connected Siberia to North America. It's possible that the builders of the monument migrated to Japan from another part of the world. But if that's true, where did they go when the ice melted and the oceans rose? Did they build ships to flee their sinking home? Or did they meet an untimely demise when the waves crashed into their settlement and drowned them all? To this day, nobody knows exactly how or why the Yonaguni Monument was constructed. Some say it's a man-made structure that dates back 10,000 years. Others say that it's just a rock formation that looks similar to a set of stairs. So what do we think? Well, let's weigh the pros and cons of both sides of the argument. If Yonaguni is a natural rock formation, then why do the rocks look so geometric and precisely cut? How could waves and wind make a structure so intricate without any help from human hands? Many researchers argue that this is the perfect explanation for the monument. They say that it is a rare example of natural erosion that occurred after volcanic activity created the underwater mountain we see today. Volcanic eruptions also explain why there are so many artifacts from the last ice age. Proponents of this theory say that ancient people probably didn't build anything here at all. Instead, they lived in caves nearby and hunted wild animals. Over time, the sea level rose due to melting glaciers, and eventually the caves were underwater. Therefore, the humans left the area and moved somewhere else. Now let's look at the other side of the argument. If ancient humans did build this structure, then where are the rest of the buildings? Why haven't we found a city or village somewhere nearby? And why does the structure look so much like a sacred monument rather than a home or workplace? The biggest problem with this theory is that we haven't found enough evidence to prove that ancient humans lived in this part of Japan 10,000 years ago. Still, archaeologists continue to search for new clues that will shed light on this mystery. In 2019, scientists used laser scanning technology to image the monument in greater detail. The technology worked very well in some areas, but it wasn't precise enough to capture all of the ruins. So the mystery continues. But what if it's something even bigger than we can imagine? What if Yonaguni isn't just a collection of random rocks or a small monument? What if it's the remaining structure of a whole city? And what if it was once the capital of a civilization older than the Egyptians? This idea sounds crazy, but consider the fact that Japan is mostly made up of tiny islands. It's possible that a great civilization thrived here 10,000 years ago, but the cities and towns were lost to the sea. Perhaps when the ice melted, the entire Japanese archipelago was submerged underwater. Only the tip of the mountain where Yonaguni stands today remained dry land. This could explain why only this particular place seems to show evidence of ancient human life. Also, we have found similar megalithic structures in other parts of the world that could have been used for religious purposes. For example, the Nabta Playa in Egypt is an ancient megalithic site that was constructed 10,000 years before the pyramids were built. Researchers believe that the site may have been used to predict solstices and equinoxes. This makes us wonder if the builders of Nabta Playa came from the same civilization as the people who built Yonaguni. Scientists have also found alignments with certain stars from prehistoric times all around the world. For example, there is the Serpent's Mound in Ohio, which aligns with the constellation Draco the Dragon. Then there is the Eka site in Australia, which aligns with the Southern Cross. Could these sites be connected to Yonaguni? Were the Japanese people using the stars to guide them when they built their monument all those years ago? There is so much evidence to suggest that we are just beginning to scratch the surface of human history. There may be tens of thousands of years of history missing from the timeline, and Yonaguni could be the key to unlocking it. As we learn more about this mysterious monument, we hope to uncover secrets about the ancient world that have been hidden from us for millennia. It's possible that the builders of Yonaguni were much more advanced than we think. They may have had access to technology and knowledge that we've only dreamed of. Who knows what secrets they held or where they got that knowledge? But one thing is sure, Yonaguni is more than just a myth. It's a gateway to the past, and it holds secrets that could change our understanding of human history forever. We've been exploring what other civilizations we might have lost throughout history, but there is one question that looms largest of all. How many civilizations have we lost? And to answer that question, we first need to define what a civilization is because it's more difficult to determine than you may think. Anthropologists use a number of different markers to identify a civilization, such as a society with cities, a central government, and a high level of social organization, not to mention some sort of written language or languages. But while these qualities are useful to narrow down the search parameters, they also don't help us very much when we're dealing with societies that left no trace behind except perhaps their DNA. And yet, without a way to measure civilizations, we can't hope to calculate how many we might have lost over the millennia. It's like trying to count the leaves on all the trees in all the forests in the world. We simply don't have the resources or the time to do it. So instead, let's talk about the civilizations we know we've lost. According to archaeologist John Register, we've probably lost between 80 to 90% of all civilizations out there. But don't worry too much about this statistic because archaeologists aren't exactly sure how to arrive at the other 10 or 20 either. Register explains that the chances of finding a civilization are fairly slim even when archaeologists are searching in areas where people have lived for thousands of years. And it turns out that we don't really know that number either. As of right now, archaeologists have identified about 6,000 ancient settlements in North America alone, and that's just for the settled agricultural societies. Earlier, more nomadic cultures are much harder to track and even harder to date. For instance, take the Clovis culture. They were one of the earliest known complex societies in North America, dating back to around 13,000 years ago. But archaeologists have only been able to identify about 400 sites that can confidently be attributed to them. And that's in North America only. If we expand our scope to the rest of the world, things get even more complicated. Take Africa, for instance. Archaeologists believe that humans first developed the ability to speak somewhere on the continent around 200,000 years ago. And yet most of the archaeological record consists of nothing but stone tools, animal bones, and other objects that tell us little to nothing about the people who made them. And that's not because Africans didn't have the ability to develop writing. After all, the Egyptian civilization developed its own writing system sometime before 3200 BCE. No, it's because each civilization had its own writing system. That would include the Nubian kingdoms of Kerma and Kush, which both flourished in the same region as Egypt, but whose writing systems were completely indecipherable to outsiders. Because nobody could read these languages, they essentially don't exist for anyone other than archaeologists and historians. Unless one of them gets lucky enough to stumble upon the key to unlocking these scripts, the vast majority of the knowledge contained within them will be irretrievably lost. But even if we could account for every civilization on Earth that had its own writing system, we would still be missing the ones that didn't leave any written records behind. I mean, do you think that the Egyptians would have considered themselves a civilization? What about the Sumerians or the Indus Valley people? Of course, they would have thought of themselves as civilized, but that doesn't mean that all of their contemporaries would have agreed. After all, just because someone considers themselves civilized doesn't mean they are. This is where the term advanced culture comes into play. Basically, archaeologists use it to describe any group that has more or less the same characteristics as the civilizations we all know about, like cities, organized governments, and social hierarchies, but without a writing system or any other hard evidence of literacy. There are hundreds of these advanced cultures around the world, and we've probably only discovered a fraction of them. Just think of all the places that haven't even been explored yet, like the bottom of the ocean or the Amazon rainforest. Plus, there's stuff right under our noses that we haven't looked at in ages. A good example is the Kingdom of Quito located in what is today Ecuador. The Spanish destroyed most of it in the 16th century, but archaeologists have only recently uncovered substantial evidence that there was once a thriving civilization here. Or consider the Kingdom of Dogon in what is today Mali. Most Europeans didn't even know it existed until the early 20th century, despite the fact that it had been around for at least 900 years. Unfortunately, once we start talking about advanced cultures, things get even trickier because there's no consensus among archaeologists about what counts as advanced. Some believe that a civilization needs to have monumental architecture to qualify. Others say that they need to have a significant population or hold a monopoly on something important like ironworking. Even so, there are still a few advanced cultures that almost everyone agrees should be on the list. The Norte Chico civilization in Peru, for instance, had huge pyramids and temples, not to mention a sophisticated system of roads and aqueducts. By some estimates, its population rivaled that of Egypt at its peak. Yet we still know very little about it. The reason is that its writing system hasn't been deciphered yet. Without being able to read their texts, everything that archaeologists find tells them nothing about the people who made it. The same thing is true for the civilization in the Iranian plateau known as Elam. They had palaces, temples, and even a writing system of their own, but they wrote in a cuneiform script that nobody has been able to decipher yet. That goes double for the mysterious kingdom of Ani in modern Turkey. We have a pretty good idea of what life was like there based on the material evidence, but because nobody can read their language, their literature is indecipherable. And those are just the ones we've found. How many more are hiding beneath the waves or buried deep in the jungle? Or maybe they're right under our feet, invisible to modern eyes? Well, we may never know. And that brings us to the final part of this series. What happens if our civilization disappears? So far, we've discussed why it is so difficult to study past civilizations and the countless ways that entire cultures can be wiped off the face of the earth in the blink of an eye. But what if it were to happen to ours? What if we lost our civilization tomorrow? It sounds like a crazy idea, but it's not as far-fetched as you might think. Our planet has experienced 5 mass extinctions, which means that 75% or more of all species disappeared from the face of the earth. If that can happen to our biosphere, then anything is possible. It's just a matter of time until something takes us out. But assuming that we manage to stick around for another 1,000 or 2, what will future generations know about us? It is possible that they have just as little information as we have about the Indus Valley civilization, since both the Harappan language and their script remain indecipherable. Unlike the Indus Valley people, though, we have left behind plenty of evidence of our own existence, but it's mostly garbage. I'm talking about plastic, nuclear waste, abandoned buildings, and everything else that makes up the physical remnants of human civilization. Most of it will probably be gone within a few centuries, but some will remain for thousands of years. In fact, some archaeologists expect our entire civilization to be indistinguishable from the garbage we leave behind. And when they're excavating it, they won't be able to discern anything about our culture or way of life, no matter how hard they try. We're essentially destroying our own legacy with our own hands. I mean, we barely take 2 minutes to remove dirt from artifacts before labeling them and putting them in a database. Can you imagine what a culture that values speed over thoroughness will do to our legacy? To make matters worse, our descendants might not even realize that the structures they uncovering are the remnants of skyscrapers or highways. After all, most of us don't know what a necropolis looks like. The good news is that archaeologists will still have plenty of clues as to what life was like in the 21st century. They'll just have to do a lot of work first. The unknown is vast, and we've only just scratched the surface. But there's always more waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoyed this journey into the unexplained, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more mysteries, more forgotten stories, and more echoes from the past. And if you think you've seen it all, think again, because the next story might just change everything.